An artist's duty, as far as I'm concerned, is to reflect the time. I think that is true of painters, sculptors, poets, musicians. As far as I'm concerned, it's their choice. But I choose to reflect times and the situations in which I find myself. That to me is my duty.
Leave those bees alone, Beyonce.
When everything is so desperate, when every day is a matter of survival, I don't think you can help but be involved. Young people, black and white, know this. That's why they're so involved in politics. We will shape and mold this country, or it will not be molded and shaped at all anymore. So I don't think you have a choice. How can you be an artist and not reflect the time? That to me is the definition of an artist.
Can't possibly accept this award. The Lemonade album was just so monumental, Beyonce. It was so monumental.
I'm not Hollywood, and I thought it was really outrageous that she used it as a platform to attack police.
Beyonce is this country's best propagandist right now.
Real quick, if you were not raised in the South, I need you to shut your mouth.
Rated. Beyonce's music is not that good. Beyonce can't even dance. She can't even really sing. Why is she performing at football? Keep sports. Beyonce's not the next Michael Jackson. Beyonce. At the end of the day, you don't like Beyonce because you're a racist.
And the Grammy goes.
On Christmas Day 2024, the Houston Texans played the Baltimore Ravens in a first-of-its-kind live televised game on Netflix. As a football game, it wasn't anything special. The Ravens dominated the Texans 32-2, as many expected. But y'all don't be caring about sports, so I'm going to skip the part about the game being scoregami and all that. A lot of people don't care about sports. In fact, despite the NFL being super popular, they, like me, can't get certain people to tune in unless they provide something unique and special to draw them in. And I don't know if there's anything more unique and special than the biggest American pop star since Michael Jackson, one Beyonce Knowles Carter. Beyonce is the most iconic black pop star of the last 2 decades, and she performed the halftime show, which was her first big televised performance since performing at the NFL's biggest show back in 2014. And this is also her biggest performance since touring the Renaissance album back in 2023, along with being the first time she performed anything from her most recent album and possibly most controversial album, Cowboy Carter. Cowboy Carter being Beyonce's first entry into country music, something that no major black musical star has done probably in decades or a generation. By most measures, this performance was a huge success. It was a great performance. It featured multiple songs and major guests from the album. It was visually interesting and immaculately timed. It was everything everyone might expect from a star who has dominated pop culture, especially black pop culture, for as long as she has. And the ratings showed it was a great win for everyone involved. The NFL got eyes on it that usually wouldn't watch its product, and Beyonce got to expose a taste of her visuals for her upcoming Cowboy Carter concert series. However, as I said, this album, Cowboy Carter, was more controversial than some of her earlier albums. It wasn't controversial because of its raw vulnerability and delving into personal drama like Lemonade. It wasn't controversial due to its overtly queer aesthetics and themes like in Renaissance. Cowboy Carter was controversial because it was true to its country roots and vibes, a genre and aesthetic that, while inherently black, if you know the history, in modern times, that aesthetic had been adopted by people who are really openly hostile to many people that are fans of Beyonce, including Beyonce, who, even though this album was great quality and featured many mainstream country artists, it wasn't featured on country radio at all, nor was it nominated for any country awards. The white-ran country music world basically acted like Beyonce, the biggest pop star in the world, didn't exist. Another controversial element was the jingoistic pro-America aesthetics that typically are in country music, but felt out of place with Beyonce's blackface attached to it. The cover of the album is Beyonce on a white horse carrying a giant American flag. The The album features a lot of rising black country artists, which many black folks celebrated, but it also features some white artists who many consider culture vultures in Miley Cyrus and Post Malone. And although everyone understands that Beyonce has always loved and flirted with country as a proud country girl from Houston, many of Beyonce's core fans, namely black women and queer men, felt a little put off that Beyonce was getting really cozy with a community that historically has not been very friendly to them. Furthermore, outside of Beyonce's fandom, many political thinkers and critics have pointed out that Beyonce, while supremely talented and hardworking, is also an unapologetic part of corporate media and a media machine that does a lot to uphold and promote the status quo, which that core audience also tends to suffer the most under. She often plays her role in this machine in insidious ways that make it seem like she might be a radical counterculture, subversive, change agent, that she's an ally to these communities. But when it counts the most, or when it counts the most for her, she kinda isn't. The most notable example being the 2013 Super Bowl performance, where she took the image of the Black Panthers, a radical black communist organization hell-bent on destroying the status quo, and used their imagery and aesthetics to support an event, a movement that they would have been diametrically opposed to, basically bastardizing their whole legacy for the sake of a show.
You just might be a black Bill Gates in the making.
For a while, black culture critics have tried to lovingly critique Beyonce's role in this quiet war of media, art, misinformation, and counterinsurgency. I am not the first person to point this out. Other creators who are more closely aligned to Beyonce's community and fandom, like T Noir, Herbie Revelis, and Khadijah Mbow, to name a few, have made videos on this that you should watch, and I'll put in the description. And their videos critiquing Beyonce often yield some negative responses, but those responses in those videos exist on YouTube. And for reasons I'll get to later, having a contentious opinion on YouTube is a very different experience than having a contentious opinion on one of the other most watched social media content sites, TikTok. TikTok is a place where the smallest spark can set a timeline on fire, and YouTube doesn't have a timeline, and that kind of tells you all you need to know about the difference in how certain attitudes and discussions go on each one. Fires do start on YouTube, it just takes a lot to get them going. TikTok fires are nothing new, but when Beyonce's performance was critiqued by a young creator named Hannah, it exploded into a four-alarm blaze that many on the app had never seen before, crossing a variety of black-oriented content bubbles, all in one of the most tumultuous and scary political moments of the decade. Somehow one young woman making a seemingly mundane observation about Beyonce's performance set off arguments that introduced discussions of racial identity and representation, misogyny, black political thought, revolution, liberation, the 2024 election, online rage cycles, and so much more, so much that I somehow spent this much time making a video about all of it. You may be thinking, this seems stupid. There's no reason for a video to be this long if it's only talking about Beyonce, a meaningless online drama connected to TikTok. And in some context, you're right. I'm not gonna lie to you about this. But if you do that, you'll be missing some bigger ideas tucked in between all of this drama and mess. Because what I'm really gonna be getting into here is how Beyonce does a lot. If you want to understand the problem of modern black art as it pertains to black struggle and black politics and how those things don't always match with capitalism, you really want to talk about Beyonce. If you want to talk about social media atomization and how many of these apps are designed to make us dumber, meaner, more isolated, and more unhinged, you still want to talk about Beyonce. No matter what you're getting at, in some form or fashion, even when it doesn't make a lot of sense, you might still end up talking about Beyonce, and the reason is Beyonce is everything. So sit back and let me explain why. Part 1, Beyonce. In my head, it feels like I shouldn't have to explain who Beyonce is. She's Beyonce, right? She's arguably the biggest black artist, musician, pop star in the world, and arguably the biggest pop star period in the world. Definitely the biggest since Michael, and many would say is definitely on Michael's level. But I don't think that's really getting at just how impactful Beyonce is. And in this first section, I want to make sure that comes across. I imagine some of you are casual Beyonce fans and thus maybe taken aback by how much I'm trying to impress upon you her magnitude, especially as a straight black man. We are not necessarily the usual suspects for championing the greatness of a Beyonce. But that's kind of the thing, because at the end of the day, it's hard to think someone could be so significant yet still have so many people not really engage with them seriously. Despite being such a huge, impactful figure, Beyonce is also somehow immensely underrated. Because she's a black woman, because she only speaks through her music, because she's elusive as an artist and doesn't do a lot of interviews, she kind of gets looked over outside of her pocket of huge fans in her world of pop and R&B music. Like, for example, I, as a pretty significant Beyonce fan, was shocked when I found out that Cowboy Carter was her first Grammy for Best Album, especially since I don't really like that album much, and I'll get to that later. Just bear with me for a while. In my head, surely the album Beyonce or Four or definitely Lemonade would have won her the Best Album Grammy. Not Best R&B Artist, not Best Pop, not Best Hip Hop or whatever, literally the Best Album. But no, Beyonce is actually the most nominated and award-winning artist in Grammy history, but she's always only dominated that explicit space that is okay for women and black people. Beyonce does pop and R&B music, and as intrinsically black arts, these genres are just not taken as seriously in comparison to the other more prestigious genres, if the Grammys are any indication. In fact, in the last 30 years, the only other R&B artist to win the Best Album award was Lauryn Hill. If you skip older black figures doing classical genres like Herbie Hancock and Ray Charles, Lauryn Hill, along with Outkast, are the only purveyors of a modern black musical genre to win the Best Album in that time frame. And let's not ignore the fact that Cowboy Carter is at its core a country album. So there's a bit of that Denzel winning for Training Day type energy for me. Meanwhile, Taylor Swift somehow has 4 Best Album Grammys, not Best Pop Albums, Best Album. And I'm not sure if I've heard more than 4 Taylor Swift songs my entire life. What, Take Me Out? Damn, is that all I got? I know I've heard some more. But I guess my point is, it shows how someone can be huge in a given space and inconsequential in another. And I'm gonna come back to that, but first, we still gotta continue to make sense of how Beyonce even came to dominate the space she was stuck in. Today, we engage with Beyonce from the perspective of a music landscape literally built by her and her image. And I don't think you can appreciate how impactful she is now if you don't understand where she came from.
Her name is Beyonce Knowles.
Beyonce Giselle Knowles was born in Houston, Texas in 1981 to Matthew and Tina Knowles. As a child, Beyonce showed interest and talent and in music, and by the time she was in middle school, she was fully pursuing a career in music.
In this world, the world might be hard to see.
First with the group Girls' Time, which had like 6 or 7 members from what I understand, and that was eventually broken down to the 4 who became Destiny's Child. Much like in the world of hip hop, it's important to understand that the music landscape was very different at this time. This is the mid-90s, and R&B music is still a huge part of black music and the music industry in general. And the girls group had been a staple of R&B and pop music for decades and was still going strong. Destiny's Child was meant to carry on a legacy that went all the way back to like the Supremes in the late 50s and probably even before then. When you go back and you look at soul, R&B, funk, rock, and eventually hip hop, these are all by far America's most popular genres of music, not just in America, but worldwide. America's biggest export historically is not democracy, but art made by black people. The problem is, as the famous quote says, they want our rhythm, not our blues. So rhythm and blues music, aka R&B, along with these other genres, as we see from the Grammys, have always been seen as inferior to other forms of music, or in reality, derivatives of these other forms of music, but just made with white people doing it. Billie Eilish also has a Best Album award and got it before Beyonce. No shade to Billie Eilish, I'm just saying. Billie Eilish is a nigga now. Like, that's how they do us. Anyway. Furthermore, black music has since the earliest days of music history been intensely exploited. Artists have seldom had actual ownership of the music they perform. Labels will own almost everything but the performance rights to any art being created by these black creatives. And this world of exploitation was not race neutral, as many black figures would eventually get in on the hustle of finding talent, signing them to exploitative one-sided deals, and then taking everything they can out of the equation, leaving the artists to fend for themselves when it was all said and done. This will definitely come up later. Because of this, girl groups are often a very easy lick for enterprising and unscrupulous label executives and talent managers. There was never a shortage of talented, beautiful women around, and never a shortage of desire for those talented, beautiful women to be songstresses and pop stars and dancers and entertainers. And many of these women grew up watching Diana Ross and Whitney Houston and Tina Turner and dream of their opportunity to be those stars at the center of all that attention, fame, and nominal fortune. And they didn't know the hardship involved in those careers. So when these young girls get approached by some scumbag with a few dollars and big promises, they're often willing to sign on the dotted line and sign their life away. And this story has been told countless times throughout the history of the music industry, including with Diana Ross and Tina Turner, but also famously TLC, Ashanti, Kesha. I could go on forever if I wanted. Beyonce and Destiny's Child seemingly avoided this fate by Beyonce's own father being their manager, thus removing some threats from the equation, at least you might think. Original members of Destiny's Child, LaToya Luckett and Latavia Robinson, eventually left the group in the early 2000s, claiming that Matthew Knowles had managed them in a way that unfairly benefited Beyonce and the fourth member, Kelly Rowland, who was unofficially an adopted daughter of Matthew and Tina Knowles. Years later, after going solo, Beyonce would also leave her father's management under allegations of him stealing from her. We'll come back to that later as well. But this is important to recognize right now because at this early point in Beyonce's career, she was very much a passenger. At this time, so many R&B artists, especially women, whether solo or in groups, are not autonomous. They're all passengers in the system and the industry. They were the front face of a complex production behind them of songwriters, music producers, managers, stylists, publicists, etc. And this is often how they justify not giving that much money to the artists themselves, because in their minds, they were actually making the magic happen. The artists just happened to be there. To an extent, this is a logical assessment of the situation. While Beyonce and Destiny's Child were highly talented and hardworking, especially early on when they didn't have access to all the resources of the industry, there were also plenty of other groups that had far less going for them, but were being propped up by industry support systems as well. For every Destiny's Child, TLC, or SWV, there was a total: Changing Faces, 3LW, Black, 702, Jade, All Saints, Atomic Kitten, Moke and Steph, Sugar Babes. These are starting to sound made up, but yes, do a couple of Googles. They all exist. I don't remember at least half of those. Regardless, Destiny's Child was a huge success, probably the last great girl R&B pop group ever, with tons of hits all through the late 90s and early 2000s, from No, 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 No to Bills, Bills, Bills. And it's important to remember that music culture was different then because everything was still filtered through traditional media venues. You had to go to BET. You had to go to MTV. You had to go. The camera overheated, but we back at it. The fuck was I talking about? I was talking about how VH1 don't like black people. Yeah, it's ironic like now, but back then there were no black people on VH1 pretty much ever. That was a weird thing they were able to do to kind of like literally whitewash, blackwash their background. Like throughout all of the 80s and 90s going into the 2000s, no niggas on VH1, and we just let that slide. Anyway, the point I'm getting at is there were no niche interest or independent artists. There was no algorithmically optimized playlist or For You page. You were either a big deal, a B-teamer, a wannabe, a has-been, or a never was. And considering the competition around, to stretch a sports reference in here for my typically predominantly male audience, Destiny's Child were basically the 2010 Warriors. Men, are y'all watching? Is anyone watching this? Am I fucking up putting this much time and effort into a video that might only appeal to 30% of my audience? Ladies, are you enjoying watching a straight man tell you the history of Beyonce using the basketball references? Like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to join the Patreon. So Destiny's Child is dominating, but much like Goku in Dragon Ball Z, it's clear who the true star of the show is. I'm trying to please everyone. Please keep watching. The way these girl groups are set up, though, no one is ever able to reach mega stardom and like the big bucks. This is why eventually the solo turn for the top person within a given group was inevitable. And it rarely worked out for them. As rare as it was for a girl group to be as successful as Destiny's Child, it was even less likely for someone in one of those successful girl groups to break out and be as successful on their own as they were with the group. People like Candy Burris went on to still have significant careers, but her solo music never surpassed what she did with Escape. And she at least had a few hits, which is more than can be said for Coco, Mila, Latosha Scott, Dawn Robinson, and Kelly Rowland of Destiny's Child. And more if I could think of them. But Beyonce did have a few things going for her that some of these other singers didn't have. But we'll also get to this later. I will say I legit feel like Left Eye probably could have been huge had she not tragically passed away, but I'm getting off topic. I don't have time for that for this video. Beyonce was so big, like I remember as a young man not knowing the names of the other girls in Destiny's Child early on, but knowing which one Beyonce was. And she was very much the template of what lighter skinned R&B starlets began to look like at the turn of the millennium, when darker skinned Black women were starting to truly get invisibilized by not just the industry, but like media in general. So her going solo was automatic. It like made sense, but it also was just going to be one more light skinned girl in a growing bucket of light skinned girls at the time. She would probably have a hit or two and then be right back with Destiny's Child until their run was over. Or at least that was our thinking at the time. But pretty early on, it became clear that Beyonce was better than just another pretty light-skinned girl singing. So good, in fact, that some years later, not only was Destiny's Child over, but low-key the entire genre of R&B girl groups and solo acts, something within Beyonce, even at the very beginning, resonated in a way that was not repeatable, even though there were a million other girls before, during, and after her trying to repeat the same formula. None of them stuck like Beyonce. Here's a quick list of all these women that I remember that Beyonce basically Thanos-tapped out of existence after the first couple of years of her career. Keisha Cole, Christina Milian, Maya, Ashanti, Truth Hurts, Blue Cantrell, Mel B, Jordan Sparks, Olivia, Nivea, like 2 or 3 Braxton sisters, and of course, good old Carrie Hilson, God rest her soul. I'm not saying that Beyonce did anything nefarious or on purpose, although there are videos that will try to tell you that that was the case. I'm just pointing out that within her first 4 albums, Beyonce was so much better than her competition that there just wasn't room for them to be any actual competition. The closest person, of course, was Rihanna, but Beyonce and Rihanna were very different like early on, and then they both were associated with Jay-Z, so there was no real competition between the two. Beyonce was dominating the genre, but she still actually wasn't Beyonce yet. In 2008, for her 3rd studio album, Beyonce changed the game for the first of many times with her single for her new album, Single Ladies. The song Single Ladies and this video are perfection, and I can't fully explain it. The song itself is fun, it's flirty, it's catchy as hell. It forces you, despite your best efforts, to sing along with it and visualize the stripped down minimalist video, which looked like nothing else in the industry at the time. This is still the late 2000s, where first off, music videos were a thing, and there was a huge variety of different ways that stuff was presented, but nothing looked like what Beyonce did here. From the single leotards to the simple backdrop and the like metal arm, like Iron Man thing she was rocking at the time, which seemed weird at the time, but she just made it work. Like, first indication that Beyonce is built different is that this chick started walking around with a robot arm and folks was like, yeah, that shit is hot. Like, other Carrie Hilson couldn't have pulled that shit off. The song spawned a million memes and parodies. People were doing the dance. It probably broke up some relationships or got some folks to get married, as women were like, look, if you like it, nigga, put a ring on it. It worked for my wife. It was one of Beyonce's earliest examples showing that no one was in her lane. But we also see the uniquely intense backlash she is able to engender in connection to her success, because it's around here where she starts to become the target of the Black Christian right who claims she sold her soul to the devil to be so successful, which is really like sad. And that like that was the thing. All the Illuminati stuff of the late 2010s really deserves its own video, because that was a wild time.
She's literally saying she used the Bible as a tampon.
Because basically in the minds of this group of churchy Negroes, if you were successful, you had to have done it not through hard work or even a little luck. You sold your soul to the devil. Niggas shouldn't have this much money. That was the thesis for that whole movement. But anyway, all kinds of silliness ensues. But by her next album, Beyonce's self-titled 5th album legit changed the world. Before releasing her 5th self-titled album, a lot of things changed with Beyonce. She got married, she had her first child, and most notably, she fired her father as her manager. See, while Beyonce's natural talent and charisma and work ethic were on display throughout this early run, she was still, again, a passenger. The same dynamic in place back when she was a child in the 90s was still there with her dad as she was pushing 30. There were stories about them not getting along, that Beyonce was trying to do things different and her father couldn't see the vision. So conflict kept erupting. And then eventually, with rumors of money being stolen by him back in 2011, it was finally time for her to split. So that was a big change. But if she'd had continued just in the same level of excellence that she had at this early juncture of her career, just being the best R&B star of her era, that would have still been a big deal and influential and iconic. But the truly earth-shattering impact was actually yet to come. After leaving her father, Beyonce joined Parkwood Entertainment, and their team put Beyonce not just into album mode, but development and reflection mode. Now independent from her father and also a mother and a wife, and as a full-grown woman, she was now a driver instead of a passenger. But we were still asking the question, who was Beyonce? She spent most of 2012 and 2013 out of the public eye, figuring all that out and not really doing a lot for the first time since the mid-90s. And when she came back, people literally were not ready. They were not prepared at all.
I think that love can happen.
Wait a minute. Wait, I'm sorry. I think Beyonce just released an album on iTunes.
What?
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Whoa! Whoa!
Oh my God.
Whoa!
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
On December 13th, 2013, Beyonce dropped a surprise release for her self-titled album and first album after leaving her father's management and now under the management of Parkwood Entertainment. And in a weird way, for me at least, this kind of feels like her debut album. I think it's very pointed that she named it Beyonce, as if this was our first time truly meeting her. And it makes sense because at this point, she stops being Beyonce and starts being Beyonce. It was amazing to see a new Black megastar emerge, at the time only a few years since Michael Jackson had passed, probably for the first time since Lauryn Hill had taken the world over a decade earlier. And much like Lauryn Hill, the other big change from this album is how it started to present meaningful messages with her art. This is where her music begins to reflect the times more, which isn't necessarily a good thing because the times seemed like a good time at the time. But through the passes of time, we realized it was actually a very bad time. This is the 2010s era of political and liberal optimism. Obama is in office. BuzzFeed is a thing and it's at its peak. If you weren't living in the many places America was bombing or exploiting, there was this feeling that the world was full of wonder and opportunity for Black folks and queer folks and women for the first time in a long time. And Beyonce and her music typify that optimism and confidence in what may come next. But in retrospect, it paradoxically shows us just how far off we were in our thinking at the time. For example, take the girl boss anthem Flawless, which was one of the first singles. Flawless was a huge hit featuring a chorus where Beyonce tells her peers to bow down before her dominance of the industry. But very significantly, it features a short excerpt from Nigerian author Chinenande Adichie defining feminism for the first time to a generation of women and men who probably had never heard that term in a serious context before. I know some of you actually head-ass people are gonna be like, well, feminism had been around forever. Yes, I know, I fucking know. However, at the time, that was not the place feminism had in the wider pop culture. No one had ever represented feminism like this in the mainstream. Up until the 2010s, the concept of feminism was widely derided in male-dominated mainstream media. Feminists in the media were always depicted as angry, ugly, and unreasonable, and mostly white.
Now let's get back to women. What are they for? The two C's, cooking, kitchen.
Al, I'm amazed your knuckles don't bleed when you walk.
Whether you were watching Martin or Married with Children, or even the Powerpuff Girls, it was always being presented in a specific way to keep it locked in a certain space where it was never to be taken seriously. But in the 2010s, this began to change in what was greatly referred to as pop feminism. Pop feminism had the effect of having a whole generation of young girls grow to identify with feminism going forward, but not without some unintended consequences. I'll argue that some great things came out of this wave, and it was a net positive for the world that feminism went from this derided niche area of academic study to engaged with and represented in mainstream ideology positively. But there were more than a few problems, namely that despite what Bell Hooks wrote in her 2000 book, this feminism wasn't for everybody. Pop feminism, for all its potential, was definitely a white-centered Western movement. It, like many American-centered progressive movements, sought to not really dismantle the hegemony of America's power structure, but to redistribute its spoils of empire and ongoing genocide to a slightly larger pool of people. The best way I can explain it is that pop feminism was to Hillary Clinton, much like Black excellence was to Barack Obama. And yes, Black excellence is not a good thing. Watch my other videos. Both present inspiring images of progress and change for traditionally marginalized groups, which is a positive thing to want to pursue, but hidden in the way that stuff was presented were all these barriers and bait and switches to what progress really looked like. So this feminism wasn't for women working in sweatshops that made the types of clothes that Beyonce would eventually sell back to us in America for a high markup. It wasn't for the women in Gaza being bombed way back in 2008. It wasn't for poor Black women in America who couldn't aspire to the aesthetic and imagery that Beyonce had realistically. It was barely even for just sexual minorities. It was mostly for skinny, attractive, educated, professional white women and a handful of Black women that mostly could look the part. And Beyonce did look the part, but even Beyonce was a light-skinned drop in a very, very white bucket for this feminist movement. Elsewhere in the pop world, Katy Perry, Gwen Stefani, Pink, Lady Gaga, and others were really the face of this pop feminist wave, often overshadowing Beyonce when she was clearly a superior artist even at the time. And even on YouTube, figures like Jenna Marbles and Lacey Green amassed huge followings as modern feminist images, while women like Julesy, Francesca Ramsey, and Kat Black didn't garner the same attention and were low-key chased out of YouTube by the anti-SJW wave that was running rampant at the time. So working class women and Muslim women and immigrant women were all still suffering in the same way. They just maybe had better, more inspiring music and media to consume at the time, while everyone seemed to be thinking that we were on this girl power feminist wave, but only for a select few. The most ironic evidence of the limitations of this form of feminism come from Chimamanda Adichie herself, who gave us that definition in Flawless. Years later, she came under heavy criticism for anti-trans stances and statements that she made in the late 2010s. A position she hasn't moved from since then. She even defended J.K. Rowling's transphobic essay in 2021 and blames the backlash for her enrolling on cancel culture. So again, to not quote Bell Hooks, this feminism was not for everyone. And I want to be clear that this isn't Beyonce's fault. This isn't even really pop feminism's fault. The fault is with, as Bell Hooks would say, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. However, it makes it harder to identify that issue when all this other mess is in the way. And Bell Hooks herself is an example of that problem, because even when Bell Hooks was trying to critique Beyonce, she would often come off as an out-of-touch auntie wagging her finger at the young girls and calling them fads.
I apologize. I was going to buy it and bring it. The Time magazine that has Beyonce on the cover, because one could deconstruct for days that first, she's looking kind of like a deer in headlights, and she's wearing the little panty and bra set, you know, that some of us wore like when we were 10 or 12. And I'm thinking, isn't this interesting that she's being supposedly held up as one of the most important people in our nation, in the world, and yet why did they image her? I mean, she's not glam on the cover of Time magazine.
But this isn't the best way to look at this situation. One thing I've come to realize through researching and working on this video is that there's one major figure that doesn't get enough credit for just how iconic Beyonce has become since that Beyonce album in the last decade plus. And to explain that, we really need to go back and look at that management company she's tied to, Parkwood Entertainment, specifically the person who's pulling the strings behind the scenes. I need to talk about the CEO of Parkwood Entertainment at the time, Beyonce.
I'm Beyonce and I'm the president. I had to make a very tough decision. I've been managed by my father for a very long time, and a real change meant separating from him.
So I know real Beyonce fans is like probably screaming at me, but I tricked the rest of y'all earlier when I said Beyonce joined Parkwood Entertainment and that this group guided her career from the norm. But what I should have said is that Beyonce founded Parkwood Entertainment. That's her production company. She created and ran for years as she became the biggest musician in the world. Because of that aforementioned history of R&B groups and starlets and whatnot, the overriding image of a pop star like Beyonce is that they're just the talent and that there are other smarter people, likely men, in charge of everything. Beyonce's contemporaries and predecessors and forecessors, whatever, you know, Whitney Houston, Janet, Britney, Katy Perry. All that fit that description, right? But not Beyonce. People still view Beyonce as a passenger and not the driver that she had become since she took over her own career. To be blunt, I think people really think Beyonce was just dumb and that she just had the most amazing team behind her ever. And as I say that, does that really make sense to y'all? First and foremost, Beyonce built that team herself. Those are her employees. That combination of people has created Beyonce, but they also created Chloe and Hailey from singing songs in their backyard on YouTube and made them into international stars. In this time frame, in this last 10 years, no one else in the industry has come close to making what Beyonce and her team have made. Does it make sense to say that this is Beyonce's team, that she just happened to hire and build, but they run things? Or is it most likely just her? It really is a mix of misogyny and racism that I even had to check during my own research. When you see Beyonce doing amazing things in her music and visuals and everything else, and we assume that she's just working with really talented people that are able to pull that out of her. We don't do that to Kendrick. We didn't do that to Kanye. And the more we find out about Kanye on his own, clearly, right? There were talented people involved, yes. Talented people were on Beyonce's team, but talented people are everywhere, and Beyonce's are not. Also, for the last decade, she's been very elusive and private and barely doing interviews, only speaking through her music or her own projects. And to be blunt, Beyonce's always come off kind of country and aloof. And it contradicts with the fact that she's Beyonce. I've heard people say that whenever Beyonce meets someone, she introduces herself like, "Hi, I'm Beyonce," which is just funny. Like many child stars, I think Beyonce is just kind of awkward. I think her awkwardness is one of the reasons why she's never been a good actress. Some of Parkwood's first projects were Cadillac Records and Obsession, 2 movies prominently featuring Beyonce. And let's be real, she's not very good at them. Can I say that?
Oh my God, where's Kyle? In his crib.
Somebody was inside the house?
She took my baby.
Can I say that, Beehive, without people coming after me? You know, she can't be great at everything, y'all. Let's just keep it a buck. But that same like aloofness and like distance that she keeps from people and the mysteriousness of her presentation, I think has tricked people into underestimating her. And I wonder if that's even like on purpose. Like when a dumb person wants to appear smart, they end up looking like Elon Musk. Or the one girl, what was it, Theranos, where she's dressing like the Apple guy and is clearly don't know what the fuck she's doing. That's how dumb people appear when they want to seem smart and they want to trick people into giving them money. Elon Musk has spent millions, if not billions of dollars for the sole purpose of buying other smart people's work and presenting it as their own. But Beyonce is allowing other people to look like they're doing the work that she's behind. And I think that's like scarily genius. But that's the other part we have to think about when we talk about Beyonce's effect on the industry and her effect on politics and ideology and philosophy. If she's ushering in this dominant era where she's reshaping the music industry around her, and we look at the state of the music industry, we kind of have to recognize that that kind of falls with Beyonce, and it all starts with this Beyonce album. I remember being in a late night statistics class for my graduate program in the middle of class when a usually quiet student stood up and blurted out, "Y'all, Beyonce dropped the album." And then after a little deliberation, him and like 6 or 7 other students just left the class. They just bounced. This album, her self-titled album, Beyonce, and more specifically how it was released, literally broke and changed the music industry forever. You Z's and maybe some of you younger millennials may not remember this, but albums used to come out on Tuesdays in stores. Digital copies were the minority. So you literally had to go to Best Buy or the now defunct Circuit City to purchase a hard copy of an album in order to listen to it. And even as streaming became a thing, it still didn't initially change when an album became available or how it was promoted. But today, albums get released on Fridays between 12 a.m. and 12 p.m., something that literally changed because of Beyonce. More interestingly, these albums now come out with minimal warning or promotion from those artists. They just hope the surprise factor creates a social media reaction. And this is only, again, because of Beyonce. They're chasing the magic she created with this particular event out of thin air. In the before times, artists would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe even more, on promotion, radio interviews, TRL, magazine ad space, BET appearances, strip clubs, probably even some payola under the table, all to build hype for the release date of their album. And being a hardcore fan meant you had to drive, get a ride, or take a bus to the record store after school to get the album just so you could listen to it all night and talk about it the next day at lunch. But Beyonce, who had just gone through a major management transition before this album, wanted to try something different. She wanted to see what an all-digital early surprise release might look like before she did anything to promote the album. She wanted to take some of the commercial and industry influence out of the art and just do something that would actually shock and affect people. And you can see it just in the response that people had. She even filmed visuals for every song going into the album. So not only were people greeted with new music, they were greeted with new videos as well. Beyonce showed that it wasn't necessary to include all that industry nonsense into the art, at least if you had the appropriate level of clout and quality. And the industry was never the same until it really was. Because in what will become a growing theme in her career and throughout this video, through hook or crook, whatever good this innovation did to bring the art directly back to the people and have them engage with it and not engage with hype and commerce, all that eventually went away and the industry seemingly found its footing again to understand how streaming and social media could still be used to reify the system as it had always been. In fact, I would say they've invested even more so and dominate even more through streaming with services like Apple Music, Pandora at the time, and Spotify and Tidal today, Tidal being owned by Beyonce's husband, Jay-Z. Whether by avarice or accident, when Beyonce broke the internet, she still ended up helping to put it back together in a specific way to benefit her and people like her. And here's where we have to start being more critical of Beyonce, because if she deserves the credit for how she changed the game with this album and how this album helped typify this moment, then she also deserves criticism for how the politics surrounding this album don't hold up well compared to the reality that she's been living. She deserves criticism for how the industry changed after this album to be this direct-to-consumer, eventually algorithmically driven model that she herself has greatly benefited from and still does to this day. The same logic that made her drop an album randomly on a Friday also got her to sell those Cowboy Carter tickets using dynamic pricing, where people were buying tickets for $50 or $500 and you couldn't tell what was what. Beyonce and her team is who everyone at their level of the industry is trying to be like right now. And she clocked this way back before she dropped the Beyonce album. In an interview back in 2014 with Out Magazine, Jim Saby, the then head of marketing for Parkwood, said the following.
What Beyonce understood early on when she wanted to make a change was that the industry fundamentally has changed and that you can communicate directly to your fans. You don't need to go through the promotional pipeline that 20 years ago really prevented people from being exposed to all kinds of music. What's changed for the better is that concept of manufacturing pop that happened in the 90s, when big budgets could take anyone into the studio and turn them into the next Madonna. You can't fake that anymore. If a particular social media platform isn't authentic to you, the fans will see through it. I think that's the great democratization of the internet. It exposes the frauds.
So you could argue that maybe Beyonce didn't know how dire this shift would be on regular consumers and regular musicians, but you also can't not notice how much she benefits from the industry being the way it is now. It's built in her image. It's her impact as a cultural and media figure, literally changing the world of music and the world in general. This is what Bell Hooks was trying to get at when she was sounding like an out-of-touch auntie.
Concurrently, in the world of art making, a Black female creator as powerfully placed as Beyonce can both create images and present viewers with her own interpretation of what those images mean. However, her interpretation cannot stand as truth. For example, Beyonce uses her non-fictional voice and persona to claim feminism, even to claim, as she does in a recent issue of Elle magazine, to give clarity to the true meaning of the term. But her construction of feminism cannot be trusted. Her vision of feminism does not call for an end to patriarchal domination. It's all about insisting on equal rights for men and women. In the world of fantasy feminism, there are no class, sex, and race hierarchies that break down simplified categories of women and men. No call to challenge and change systems of domination. No emphasis on intersectionality. In such a simplified worldview, women gaining the freedom to be like men can be seen as powerful. But it is a false construction of power, as so many men, especially Black men, do not possess actual power.
Bell Hooks saw the problem clearly, but then she went on to call Beyonce a terrorist, which was a wild thing to say considering that Hillary Clinton was running for president at the time. The most prolific writer of feminist and black feminist thought still managed to get caught up in the hysteria that surrounds Beyonce. This is the unique thing Beyonce is able to do as a pop culture figure. She influences hysteria. This was a woman who had hours of conspiracy theory videos that still follow her to this day, from faking her pregnancy to some songs secretly being confessions of murders that she's committed. That's what makes Beyonce so interesting, because she's literally like the sun. Everything revolves around her in some way, and she can give life and she can also destroy. Beyonce's music ends up greatly reflecting the times around her. Self-Titled happens at a moment where optimism and pop feminism under the mirage of the Obama administration made some sense. And then the bitter anger of Lemonade follows the beginning of the Trump era. Renaissance happens as LGBTQ hatred is being weaponized to support right-wing movements. And Cowboy Carter, well, I kind of struggle there. I don't like Cowboy Carter much. I don't know what it's really trying to do, at least in the political moment. It's also country music, and I just don't like country music. It's complicated. Beyonce is complicated. And in a just world, there'd be a way to have stimulating but complicated conversations around her art with other like-minded people, hearing informed and insightful takes on one of the most provocative black artists of all time, or at least of my generation. There would be a place where people can appreciate deep dialogue and where we can engage with discussions across space and even time, allowing people from opposing views and opposing time zones even to meet in the marketplace of ideas and have civil, reasonable, and enriching conversations. But that's not what we have. In the world we live in, the biggest marketplace of ideas is an unhinged cacophony of nonsense that smothers its most useful elements with an algorithm expertly trained to drive its users insane. What we have is probably the most world-altering thing in media since Beyonce's self-titled album in 2013. What we have is TikTok. TikTok started as Douyin in China in 2016 and seemingly showed a lot of potential as a social media platform early on, with the only problem being that it was concentrated in China, which has a large user population but doesn't dominate the pop culture world quite like America does, nor does it allow the absolute fuckery in its media in the name of freedom like America does. But in 2018, after a few mergers and acquisitions, it went international and began garnering American celebrity attention almost immediately. However, the real thing behind TikTok's success, aside from an insidiously intuitive algorithm, which we'll get to later, is the COVID-19 lockdown of 2020 and 2021. In March of 2020, after months of attempts to contain the virus, America joined most of the world in locking down its population to prevent the spread of the virus. The full damage COVID caused just from its lockdown won't fully be understood for another decade, in my opinion, let alone the fact that the actual disease is still here and killing and disabling people, but I digress. But the big unforeseen outcome from COVID was an explosion of content creators on pretty much all social media platforms, including myself. I made my first video in June of 2020, but my success is nothing compared to what happened on TikTok, where they started getting 800 million monthly viewers by the end of 2020 itself. TikTok was the perfect app for the apocalypse because it reduced its use to base consumption without agency or thought, which people didn't want when it felt like the world was ending. Unlike Facebook or Instagram or YouTube or Twitter, TikTok took all the control out of your hands as a user. You only scroll. Search functions are basically useless. Following creators is a good way to make them not appear in your feed. Like, there's so many creators I followed on TikTok when I still used it, we'll come back to that I forgot I follow until I went to the following section. It was like, oh yeah, I remember you, you're still making content. TikTok doesn't allow you to choose what you see first. You open the app and videos just start playing, and then you just move your thumb or your index finger or whatever. Videos are at most a few minutes long, often less than a minute, often less than 30 seconds. If you don't like what you see, you scroll and something will eventually amuse you, entertain you, make you smile, or more significantly here, make you angry. For tired, depressed, weary people worldwide, this provided the perfect escape from a scary reality that everyone was facing. When you open up TikTok, you don't have to exist. You just get subsumed into the infinite scroll, fed a steady drip of short, mindless entertainment, dances, skits, and people talking We'll get to that in a second. You get a constant feed of dopamine into your brain with the only possibility of interruption being real life forcing its way back into you. But during COVID, who had real life going on when everyone was locked inside? I don't think people appreciate the evil genius in the app's design and the fortuitousness of the fact that it came up during COVID. The fact that you don't choose what you watch forces you to keep digging to find what you want and not use your brain to search, which can make you disengage. Like, the absence of a search engine is my least favorite thing about the app, but I'm impressed by how insidious it is because it will give you a video commenting on a trend or something that's happening, but give you like the second or third part of the story. And so now you're scrolling, searching to get the actual beginning of the trend for context. But the search function is so useless that you just end up wandering into another random space of TikTok, and after a while you forget what you were planning to do in the first place, and 15-20 minutes have passed and you're coming up for air and you realize your food has been sitting outside your house for about 20 minutes and you didn't even remember ordering it. Another important aspect of TikTok that will come up later is that it's kind of racist, among other things, ableist, sexist, etc., etc. That's a little bit of an unfair statement, and that its algorithm, like all algorithms, doesn't really see color. It just responds to the biases of its viewer base. So if you like black faces, you'll see black faces. However, if you tend not to like black faces and you maybe don't realize that you don't like black faces, you will never see black faces. Same thing with overweight faces or non-traditionally attractive faces or gender non-conforming faces. And this ends up making it so certain voices and certain faces dominate more than others, and you can be very unaware of how pigeonholed content or your content bubble might be in comparison to the reality around you. The final really genius thing that's important for our story is how the app generates content out of its users, even its users who probably didn't see themselves as content creators before the app existed. And I think all of it stems from the concept of a comment section. There's a certain type of person who feels a desire to engage in discourse on social media. And I say this completely without judgment, kinda, as I am most definitely also that type of person. I was a prolific Facebook arguer in the mid-2010s. I credit my history of arguing on Facebook with the fact that I can write some of these essays in a matter of days, if not hours. Because I would be in 50 comment long battles when no one else was watching with some idiot that no one ever would see or read, but I would be making sure to make my point as much as I could in that time frame. In that moment, it was the most important battle in my life. And I'll be arguing with someone about how the earth is not flat. It was really a waste of time. So, you know, this is a self-report. But that rage cycle, that energy that you get when you argue with an idiot, is the bread and butter for creating engagement on most social media platforms. Taking advantage of the lizard brains of self-important nerds with undiagnosed behavior disorders with little else better to do, that is the lifeline of social media. Whole groups exist on Facebook and Twitter solely for creating this experience. Someone posts something stupid or provocative and people flock to the comment section with hot takes, memes, and dissertations about why they're wrong. And again, I know this from experience, at least on Facebook with my fellow geriatric millennials. But while YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram allow for 1,000-word comments in their sections and long responses, TikTok gives you like the space of 2 tweets to get your point across. And unlike Twitter, which easily allows for long responses in the form of multiple tweets, TikTok makes this as cumbersome as possible. And I think this is for a reason. They either want you to leave your little comment and get back to watching, or if you're so bold, if you think you have something really important to say, to reply to the comment in your own video. And people do, over and over and over again. And thus, an entirely new but somehow very familiar genre of content and content creator was born. We call them the yapper. Other entertainment venues on social media require, no shade, explicit talents and skills: acting, dancing, singing, playing music, writing and editing your own skits and essays. Not that all those people that do that type of content make good content, but a higher level of effort is rewarded, or at least expected. Even the bizarre, trashy content that made Vine popular once upon a time required a lot of knowledge and skill and effort to make those dumb videos and edit them into 10-second clips. And to be clear, TikTok does have all that type of content. TikTok dancers were probably the first megastars on the app. There's also tons of podcast clips, hair and makeup and cooking tutorials, etc. But I am going to dig deeper into the unique world of the TikTok yapper, because the yapper is where much discourse usually happens. A yapper is a TikToker whose content is basically short commentary on a given topic. That's it. Yappers observe the zeitgeist of what's happening in the world or on TikTok and then make a 30-second to 3-minute video giving a take or perspective on whatever that topic is. It's simple, it's short, it's pretty damn easy to do if you have the right set of skills, and I would argue it's very much encouraged by TikTok. TikTok has editing software built into it which allows you to make your video and post it within a matter of seconds after recording it, making immediate response and reaction easy. I would also argue that TikTok rewards lower quality videos from a technical standpoint. It doesn't matter if you're in a giant echoey room. It doesn't matter if your lighting is bad. It doesn't matter if you've washed your face or done extensive makeup. The app tends to reward instant, visceral, raw reaction over planned, measured creation. It's not odd to go to a Yapper's page and see that they might have posted 5 videos from one Yap session in the same room, in the same time, in one outfit, all at once. I've seen more than a few creators point out how they feel like their videos get less views when they put more effort into their presentation and quality. And that's because TikTok wants to separate the space between the users and the creators as much as possible. They want everyone using, they want everyone creating, they want everyone engaging. This may come off a bit shady to Yappers, and to an extent it is, I won't lie. But I also want to be clear, I like a lot of Yappers, and it's not easy being a Yapper. I've tried. I'm not very good at it. Not everyone can do it. Yappers have to have engaging presences. They have to be good speakers. They have to be witty. They have to be quick. They have to be somewhat fearless. And it helps to be smart and worldly and eloquent and somewhat attractive. Before my TikTok account got hacked and I stopped using it, I tried it a lot in small doses. And while I'm a pretty good speaker and witty, I'm not all of those things I just mentioned, at least not in a short few minutes. I would find myself trying to make my TikTok video and re-recording it 45 times, thinking I missed the point or that I didn't get to the point properly. And after a while, I'd just be like, yeah, I'm gonna stick to YouTube. Because on YouTube, I have time, I have weeks to write and edit. I get to research, refine, reshoot, reconsider if something I said and want to put out is maybe something that doesn't need to get put out. But to be a Yapper is to be a hypercharged commenter in a comment section. But while a comment in a comment section is a name on a page that doesn't even have to be your actual name, the Yap video is you. It's your face. It's your voice out there to be clipped, downloaded, critiqued, and memeified and created into more discourse. Once you put something out there, there's no predicting how the world will address it and what they will do to it. Will they just leave a like and a nice comment? Or will they make up a whole new internet term based off your appearance? Like, I have to tell my 9-year-old son not to use the term big back because I think that's kind of a gross term. And I know that term only exists because of TikTok. I bring all this up for one, to show respect to the Yappers out there because I do genuinely enjoy a lot of their hot takes and humorous and often very good and insightful analysis. And I know it takes a lot of talent and intellect and fearlessness. But I also have to point out that Yappers are of a certain breed and serve a particular role in content cycles on TikTok. In fact, to me, the Yapper is specifically influenced by one of the dominant forces of online behavior, stan culture, for the last, 2 decades, greatly because of the influence of Beyonce. When I announced that I was working on a video about Beyonce, I was met with much consternation from everyone who knew me personally. People warned me, watch out for the Bayhive. In my arrogance, I thought, if I survive the Barbs, I'll survive the Bayhive. The Bayhive looks sensible compared to the Barbs, but then I also realized I had like way less of a platform at that time. So maybe, I don't know, we'll see how this works out, crossing my fingers. But I do want to take a moment, especially as we're talking about TikTok, to acknowledge the level of influence that the Bayhive and stan culture as a whole has had on online culture. Stan culture, for those who don't know, is basically a term used to describe a type of hyper fandom that mostly exists online. And while today we think of stans as unhinged fans of Beyonce or Nicki Minaj or Taylor Swift, or even some K-pop fans, I'd argue that the most prominent and harmful stans are straight white dudes who play mostly video games and watch a lot of anime. No community of fans is more toxic than anime and video game fans, and they've proven this for over a decade now. The term stan comes from fucking Eminem. When you pay attention to the tone of things on TikTok and Twitter and YouTube, etc., it's hard not to see that the culture and conventions of Yapper discourse greatly are influenced by the imagery and energy of Black women and queer Black men, the main groups who also make up Beyonce's fan base. And for better or for worse, I think this is why yapper discourse can get so vicious so quickly, as a conversation might go from a thoughtful, if not maybe a bit spicy discourse, to someone getting read for filth. Read for filth being a phrase born out of inherently black and queer underground ballroom scenes that have existed amongst black queer men, drag queens, and black trans women since the 1970s, first wildly popularizing the classic documentary Paris is Burning. This is the imagery and energy that Beyonce gave us with Renaissance, and it's the energy that Beyonce has engendered for years at this point because of her iconic diva status. However, this imagery and energy really ain't for everyone, even if everyone seems to want to copy it, especially online. What some, but not all yappers do is kind of a caricature of the complex conventions that exist in ballroom culture. It's a manifestation of stan culture, but with people who have no connection to that life trying to appropriate it for likes and comments on social media, because who doesn't love a good read, right? But a lot of yappers, at least the ones I consume, are also involved in political discourse, and to be honest, I'm not always a fan of how those two things tend to mix together. Politics are already emotionally charged and very susceptible to drama and fuckery. But when you then add politics to a genre of content that amplifies drama and fuckery, you end up with a lot of bad political theater. Yappers are encouraged to trivialize and give hot takes on complex political issues, or if they do take the time to try to explain the nuance of an issue, it still gets quickly lost as commenters weaned on a culture of frivolous and mindless engagement barely listen or even willfully misrepresent just to keep things interesting. Response videos are made in bad faith to yappers, which then get responded to. The algorithm begins to push out parts of the ongoing discourse, but not all the parts, creating a fractured view of whatever is being said. Frustration and anger takes over as people are reacting to reactions to a reactor who's reacting to a political issue. And it's a game of telephone that fuels an outrage cycle that leaves everyone dumber than they were before they opened up the app. And more significantly, leaves the actual political issue hung out to dry. No one has any energy to effectively educate or discuss the topic in earnest, let alone plan to do something about it. Instead, everyone has consumed content about the issue before they actually sit back and register what is happening. And before they can do that, something else erupts in the ecosystem and the rage cycle is reset. This has happened over and over again on TikTok with many topics, but especially with important political ones. And this isn't to say that TikTok isn't a valuable resource for political education and organizing, because it actually really is. But that's what makes the problem so dire. It's hard to parse through what's real and what's fake, what are valid criticisms or perspectives, and what is reaction rage content, because of the volatility that online discourse engenders. What happens when you take an artist with the status and political inclinations of Beyonce, combined with a volatile rabid fan base that is surrounding her, that's both for and against her, and you put that into a political discussion happening on an app that is designed to engender chaos wherever it goes, you end up getting what we got on TikTok in late December of 2024. So let's touch on why Cowboy Carter has some issues from my perspective, and why it's worth discussing in the first place, and how it's emblematic of all the things that one might love or hate about Beyonce. But first, I want to beg the mercy of the Beehive so that I may hopefully continue to live in peace after this video comes out. One thing I want to do as we critique Beyonce is get into the folly of judging people based on the art that they consume. Sure, some art is better than others, right? And yeah, maybe if one of your friends thinks Candace Owens makes a few good points or Shannon Sharpe is a good journalist, you can judge that person. Maybe that's a red flag, right? However, it's become a really lazy and ironically very liberal stance to judge people based on them enjoying incredibly well-made and slickly designed art, whether that art be propaganda or not. Black Panther is one of my favorite all-time movies, and it is also probably the most problematic depiction of the concept of Pan-Africanism ever to hit theaters. It can be both of those things at once, and that doesn't make me a bad person or a person with bad politics. I left the whole leftist versus liberal section out of the video, but I have to point out that it's often leftists who take this to its most obnoxious extent. It's an insidious way for a lot of us to feel like we're doing something about the world crumbling around us, when in reality, we're just kind of being annoying online and ruining people's mood and their enjoyment of a thing. Let people enjoy things. lyrics. Within this further criticism of Beyonce or Cowboy Carter or its performance and its underlying themes, I also want to say, if you liked it, still like it. I liked it. If you love it, still love it. I loved it. In fact, I'd argue it's better to love something that's imperfect despite its challenges than to only be able to like things that perfectly align with your politics. To me, that's not really appreciating art on a deep level. All right. So with Cowboy Carter, it's important to recognize that Beyonce had loved country music for a long time and was not secretive about it. She talks of attending and performing rodeos in the early 2000s. She's had country influence pop up throughout her career, but it wasn't until Lemonade where Beyonce's country aspirations took full center stage with the song Daddy's Lessons, one of the best songs on that spectacular album to begin with. Beyonce performed Daddy's Lessons on the 50th Annual Country Music Awards back in 2000. That had to be like 17, along with the Dixie Chicks, and it was a hit, at least in the place at the time. It got a standing ovation, and everyone except for Kenny Chesney's hating ass was applauding when it was done. And it being done with the Dixie Chicks is not unremarkable. The Dixie Chicks being the first people to ever get canceled way back in 2003 for daring to criticize George W. Bush as conservative white women for the war in Iraq.
Just so you know, we're ashamed. The President of the United States is from Texas. Why did you say it?
Out of frustration.
It's funny how conservatives have built this narrative that everyone else are the snowflakes and are trying to cancel people when these motherfuckers were canceling their own women 20 years ago. And they had that same energy for Beyonce in 2016, which was wild because Daddy's Lesson is just an amazing country song. And it's as pure as country really is in the mainstream at this point, which might be what made them so mad. It's wild that country music literally sounds like trap music at this point. Half of it sounds like it's produced not just in Atlanta, but in College Park. So they're clearly stealing the energy and rhythms from hip hop and rap music. But here's Beyonce reproducing that real energy and melodies of country music. And they don't want anything to do with it because she's too black. And they can tell you that's not it, but they're fucking lying. Anything related to Beyonce was removed from the Country Music Association's media at the time, which is wild considering that Beyonce was just as huge then as she is now. But that's, again, how conservatives move in real life. In response to this, Beyonce basically said, all right, bet. She didn't immediately return with the smoke, but when she did, it was a whole album of Air Force One's energy, and that is Cowboy Carter. It's a direct response and rebuke to the notion that she didn't belong in country music based on her skin color or her politics, that country music had always been black and counterculture and rebellious. And she worked with some of the biggest, most legendary figures in country music, such as Dolly Parton and Willie Nelson, to complete the album. So the album sounded good and had major cosigns and was truly country in most of its music, but they still denied her. The CMAs, as I said earlier, acted like this album didn't happen, acted like she didn't exist. Her song was not played on any country music radio the entire time. She didn't get nominated or invited to the CMAs at all this time. You might be tempted to say that this isn't racism because Shabuzi was nominated for a few awards, but what you'll miss in saying that is that there's always been more room within certain conservative spaces for black people who don't shake the table too much. And I don't know a lot about Shabuzi, but it's coming. I hope I'm wrong. I shout out to Shabuzi, maybe, but if and when that turn happens, and y'all know what turn I'm talking about, just know I won't be surprised. So my instinct, and I think the natural instinct for black people, is to love that she made this album as an act of defiance toward white supremacy. She looked at the traditionally conservative country music world, knocked on the door, and when they refused to fully open it, she kicked it down. That's dope. But that's still limited to black representation and identity politics and the mythology of black excellence. Beyonce getting this singular victory for her against the system doesn't preclude the system from doing the same thing to others who don't have as much power. It also just happens to be in this case that Beyonce was the underdog, when in reality, Beyonce usually isn't the underdog. In fact, she's usually aligned with the people trying to take out the underdog. A perfect example of this is what happened a few years ago on Renaissance with Khalees, a woman who hadn't had nearly the career or success or power of Beyonce, who didn't marry a future billionaire. And when she publicly criticized Beyonce for the inclusion of a piece of her music that she couldn't be paid for, There was no real response, no statement, no girl power, no re-won the world type stuff from Beyonce. It was nothing. The only thing Beyonce did in the face of that criticism from Khalees was remove the sample of Khalees' voice from the song, killing the thing entirely from her perspective. Now, I want to be clear. The real culprit to that situation with Khalees wasn't Beyonce, it was Pharrell Williams. Pharrell is who signed Khalees to a fucked up contract back when she was like 17 years old in the late 90s. And it's Pharrell who basically stole her song royalties for the last 30 years. Khalees eventually gave up on really being in the music industry, and Pharrell is getting Lego movies made about his career. I want to again repeat for those who will try to misconstrue, Beyonce isn't directly responsible for the harm that was done to Khalees. Beyonce didn't make Pharrell continue to hold on to Khalees' publishing rights. Beyonce didn't go back in time to force Khalees to sign this contract. In no direct sense does Beyonce owe Khalees anything. She legally paid Pharrell to use Khalees' voice on a song that Pharrell owns the right to, which I assume was maybe refunded when she took Khalees' voice off the song and ended this public spat without ever saying anything. But that's kind of the point. Another like nerdy connection. With great power comes great responsibility. If you're going to talk this girl power type game, that was a great opportunity to back that talk up with action. We have to again engage with Beyonce as a driver and not a passenger. And more specifically, that Beyonce, by way of her father, knows exactly what position Khalees is in. It's a position that he helped Beyonce avoid when Destiny's Child was signed to Columbia, but allegedly didn't help LaToya and Latavia avoid when they were under him. It's the position that Beyonce emancipated herself from when her father was allegedly taking money from her. This situation is the perfect distillation of what Beyonce is supposed to be about, but it ends up being a perfect example of what Bell Hooks was talking about. Beyonce talks feminism and Black women's empowerment in her music, and in reality, it's not a type of feminism that is liberating. It's a false feminism that only seeks to create room for women within the matrix of domination, not to dismantle it altogether for everyone. And it's made more insidious by Beyonce's use of feminism in her branding. We acknowledge that Beyonce has control of her artistic vision and the policies she presents in it, right? But we also have to recognize that I don't think it's possible Beyonce will have become Beyonce had she not began to infuse her work with the stories and struggles and issues of Black people and Black women. And so this means we have to acknowledge that Beyonce is in control of situations that could make her be more about the politics she presents in her art, to make her at least say something about Khalees, like, sorry, advocate for her to get her publishing back behind the scenes. She could have called Khalees like Khalees wanted her to. She could have at least released a statement. Any of those things, but she didn't. And I think it's because any of those things would have put her in opposition, not just with Pharrell, but with all these other men and women that she's actually aligned with in the music industry, the Black excellence moguls that are low-key making their money off of stealing the art of other Black people, like her husband, like Irv Gotti, who only just gave Ashanti her publishing back right before he died, like Diddy, a close compatriot of Jay-Z, who was well known for stealing money from artists and only started to give money back after he started getting investigated by the feds. But that's the community, the Black capitalist community, that she's most loyal to, the ones that she never disappoints, never price gouges, and never crosses, not the single ladies, information girls who run the world. It's just a reality. Yes, Beyonce has been an advocate for Black issues in the past in ways that don't put risk to her. She's used money to bail out protesters and donated money to people, donated to Barack Obama. And these are the things that rich and powerful people often do to help when those things are easy and not threatening to real power, but nothing beyond a certain point. And I'm sorry, if we're going to give Beyonce the credit she deserves as like a force within this industry and within culture, if we're going to notice that Beyonce released a whole diss album for her own billionaire husband that features like Don't Hurt Yourself is one of the hardest diss tracks in hip hop history. Nas wishes he could have hit Jay-Z as hard as Beyonce did on that song. I can't believe that person that was capable of doing that is incapable of helping a Khalees or making clothes that aren't made by sweatshop workers in South America, or being more demonstrative about the use of her art in places like Saudi Arabia or Israel, where other women of color are being harmed. I can't put those two things in the same category and say one is real and one isn't. We love Beyonce because of what she stands for, or at least what we perceive her to stand for in her art. We identify with the struggle she's had her whole career, from fucking with white people to the black men in her life, her own damn husband, and even some of her fans who don't respect her to the level that she deserves. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't call out where she's wrong. This isn't as simple as a contradiction. This is direct hypocrisy on her part. And it does call into question how to assess Beyonce's politics in her music versus in real life. For a lot of black progressives or leftists or whatever you want to call us, it's impossible not to be aware of the underlying reality of Beyonce's pro-black and quasi-revolutionary aesthetics and how they conflict with her real life. And even in watching her just perform, as you see these things on display, you can't help but wonder which part of Beyonce is feeding into them. From here, we're going to veer off into a bit of a tangent to discuss how this war on TikTok happened, who it happened between, and how it really got off the rails, considering that it's all started from Beyonce performing on Netflix. So unbeknownst to her, when Beyonce took that stage in her hometown of Houston, Texas, she accidentally started a war on the social media app that most closely mimics the essence of her presence in real life. Beyonce being everything and everyone having a variety of opinions on her was a perfect kindling for the biggest internet fight between black folks that I've ever seen in my life. And considering those two factors, shit is about to get really stupid really fast. But before I can start, and because shit is about to get really dumb, I gotta put out some disclaimers. Specifically, I wanna point out to those of you who are really messy in the audience that I'm gonna be avoiding, when possible, spotlighting the various other figures in this story. Some of whom I know and am in community with in some form or fashion, and others who I don't know at all, most of whom are black women. And because most of them are black women, I'll be doing my best to hide their identities because y'all hate black women. I don't know which one of y'all I'm talking to. I don't know who I'm talking to in this group of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even a couple of million that I say this to, but I know some of y'all in that motherfucker, some of y'all actually are black women and you hate black women. I wish I could name names and it'd be normal. It'd be much less work for Babilla to edit this video, but the internet is not a normal place. So aside from the aforementioned Hannah, who I got permission from for making this video, I'm going to be changing names and faces, distorting voices, using stock images. I don't really know, all to just do my best to try to keep the mess that comes after this video to a low boil. Thankfully, as I said, it's hard as hell to find things on TikTok. So the messier of you will have to work really hard to go and find who I'm referring to at different times. And if that's the case, that's on you, not on me. We'll see how that works out. Anyway, on to the shit show.
Beyonce creates propaganda, and to a certain extent, that is okay before you come at me with your fucking pitchforks, but let's talk about it. I don't know what Beyonce music y'all are listening to, but to me, it is very clear that since her self-titled album, her music has a political agenda. Cowboy Carter as an album is black liberal propaganda, and I don't necessarily think that that is a bad thing. But I don't think anyone is going to sit here and debate me about the fact that there was a clear political message in those lyrics. As someone who has been a fan of Beyonce my entire life, one of the biggest critiques I have of her is that she is someone who puts out incredibly political music and then allows that music to be used for propaganda in ways that I don't agree with. And I think that this performance is a great example of that. Beyonce's song Freedom speaks to black liberation. Beyonce allowed Kamala Harris to use that song as her walkout music, which is propaganda. And yet, Kamala Harris was actively involved in the oppression of black people, in the incarceration of black people, in the further enslavement of black people. Now, do I think Beyonce needs to be canceled because she's an evil propagandist working to brainwash all of us? No. And I never fucking said that. I just said that she's a propagandist, and a damn good one at that, because I've been eating her music up my entire life.
After Beyonce's performance, there were plenty of takes, and already discourse on her was at a rolling boil on TikTok, but things didn't get weird until Hannah's take started to break out in the algorithm. And like the main thing we're gonna have to keep in mind is why Hannah's breakout happened in the first place, as opposed to one of the many other people pretty much saying the exact same thing. I'm gonna describe Hannah in 3 important ways. She is a Black woman, a leftist, and a yapper on TikTok. This description is important because it helps explain why her take blew up the way it did. I already explained what a yapper is, so like I won't rehash that. But when I say a leftist, that gets a bit complicated and I don't have time to explain everything, and I couldn't even if I tried. I acknowledge knowingly that leftists are annoying as fuck, especially online. And if I dared to try to explain what a leftist is in the video about Beyonce, it would be like adding an extra hour to the video as I break down French political history or whatever, and I don't feel like doing that shit. Just understand that as far as I can tell, Hannah is politically left of Bernie Sanders, who is left of Kamala Harris, who's left of Biden, who's low-key left of Obama, who's barely left of Ronald Reagan, but y'all ain't ready to hear that shit yet. Y'all didn't watch my Obama videos. Lastly, Hannah isn't just Black, she's biracial. And that shouldn't be that important. Like when I grew up, biracial people were just Black unless otherwise noted. And I think that's still how it works for most Black people, most biracial people. Not to say that there's nothing to say about the difference between biracial Black folks and unambiguously Black folks, but not as much as some of y'all think. Now, you would think that the fandom following a woman who is Creole, Irish, and Jewish, along with being Black, but makes explicitly Black art, that those people would not try to claim that biracial people aren't Black and don't belong in Black spaces, but boy, oh boy, just you wait. The gist of Hannah's take on Beyonce is that Beyonce serves as a venue for American propaganda. She observed the overt Americana aesthetics of Beyonce's performance and coupled it with Beyonce's history of being a hyper-capitalist and a general agent for counterinsurgency, and came away with the critique that Beyonce's performance was in many ways a work of American propaganda meant to encourage her predominantly Black audience to uncritically find pride and reclaim the myth of American exceptionalism and pride. There's evidence that this is what occurred, as some of the responses from Beyonce's performance have viewers feeling like they were proud to be Americans, which, especially at this particular political moment, was kind of awful because America had just elected a fascist wannabe dictator and was participating in a global genocide that was taking up space on social media, let alone the multiple genocides in Africa that we're not talking about a lot. There's not a lot of reasons to feel that way, and if Beyonce's show made you feel a sense of American pride, calling it propaganda makes some sense. One thing I think people didn't give Hannah credit for is that she made the point that the Cowboy Carter album engages in the same themes, but with more nuance and tact. We are meant to understand that there's a core theme of Black resistance in that sense of American pride.
The album on its own very much is a critique of how American history is told. I gathered that. I listened to the album too, y'all. But how she chose to perform that album with that imagery in that venue had a slightly different political message. It had an undertone of nationalism.
And that hits different, and even if you feel like Beyonce's use of these themes is somewhat paradoxical, they are there. Cowboy Carter, like most of Beyonce's albums since becoming Beyonce, is saturated with social and political commentary, usually of the American moment. This album in particular seeks to process the unique position that Black Americans, particularly Southern Black Americans, have in the American project. How Black Americans built this country but feel hesitant, for good reason, to lay claim to their own creation. Black people were never expected to actually be seen as American people or lay claim to citizenship of this nation. We were only meant to be beasts of burden for white people to build a nation on top of, not to participate in the nationhood with them. But generations of rebellion, resistance, sacrifice, innovation, and hard work has made it inarguable that Black people are Americans. Depending on how you look at it, Black Americans are low-key the only real Americans if you believe in like the myth of what America is supposed to be. However, that's just not what America was designed to exist as. America is supposed to be white. In fact, did you know there were actually court cases in America over 100 years ago where Japanese and Asian people applied to have white status and were denied despite the fact that in every possible way they should have qualified for being considered white? It's a wild story. I'll talk about it in my short documentary, Talking to White People, which you can only find on Nebula. I won't get into that right now, but stay tuned later in the video so you can see how to get access to that particular piece of content. All that said, Black people, definitely Black Southerners, do engage in American symbolism. You can look 10, 15 years in the past and see tons of images of Black people in the South, Black Southern rappers wearing the Confederate flag, let alone the American flag. But a question that is legitimate critique of Hannah's take is, when you see Andre 3000, one of the most quintessential Black artists of all time, wearing a Confederate flag, is that propaganda or is it resistance? Being charitable, that's what I think Cowboy Carter is meant to be about and what this performance was. There are far more qualified people who can provide that analysis. Again, Urbi Revelis is one of them, T Noir is another. I'll leave their videos in the description. All that said, this is not what Hannah and other Black leftists saw in that performance. What they saw was not necessarily an image of Black resistance, but just an image of Black Americana mythos. They saw Beyonce doing pretty much the same thing she did with the Black Panthers back in 2015. And that's because the performance doesn't have any overt signifiers that relate to a spirit of defiance and resistance. There's still a ton of Blackness in it. It's not a pure country music performance. The styles of cars used, all the Black background dancers, the including of drum majors, a staple of HBCU Black band culture, costumes blending hip hop aesthetics with country aesthetics. It's still very Black, but just being Black, despite popular belief, if you know anything about what's going on with Black people and what's going on with Black people really for generations, doesn't automatically make something pro-Black or pro-liberation. You can interpret things in the show a multitude of ways, but you can't point to anything overt that speaks to a sense of defiance to anti-Blackness inherent in America, and absolutely nothing in defiance of American empire. It's not completely fair to say that Beyonce didn't have some political messaging in the performance. The first song Beyonce performs when she comes out on stage is Yaya, which is probably one of the more overtly political songs on the album, talking explicitly about the way that Black country and blues performers were treated in the South historically, and is really metaphorical to the nature of Black struggle to attain American acceptance. But I also feel like whatever tidbits of resistance that might have been there, it wouldn't have been overly perceptible to most people watching. And I think this is a clearly deliberate decision and very much a lost opportunity. Consider even the difference between this performance on Netflix and the imagery that's coming out of the early dates for the Cowboy Carter tour. So again, perceiving that Beyonce is in control of her work and imagery, she is the driver, and the fact that it's her husband who organized this performance in the first place, we have to point to her when those more challenging themes are taken out of her performance, when it's time to appeal to the masses, to satisfy the needs of the NFL and Jay-Z. What this means is that if you haven't been to Music Genius to fully break down the song Yaya or other parts of that album, and if you don't have $70 to $700 to pay for a Cowboy Carter concert ticket, then all you have to go by is this free performance. And as we see with people's responses, it's very easy to come away from this performance without seeing any critique of America in it, which many did. The running joke is that media literacy is dead. So it is a choice to allow folks to interpret this imagery whatever way they want, knowing that it could be taken very wrongly. What's even more interesting though, is that this isn't just Beyonce. Kendrick Lamar basically did the same type of performance a few weeks later. Ironically, because Kendrick is a man and a rapper, we give him way more grace and credit for an equally confusing performance that at the end didn't really say or do anything about American empire. But even more odd is that this same quasi-pro-American performance in the face of America's growing issues with fascism also happened back in 2017 with Lady Gaga when Trump was first elected. Gaga, who was a queer white woman and was a loud advocate for LGBTQ rights at a time when that wasn't as popular as it became today, was the Super Bowl performer when Trump took office, and people were looking to her to have something, anything to say on the biggest stage for an artist in the country. But she starts her performance with God Bless America, which blew my mind even then. So there's three prominent examples of this right after Trump becomes president. America is careening towards fascism, and all of these artists who are known for being outspoken and seeking justice, they made the collective choice to get the NFL check and not make Jay-Z or whoever else, because Lady Gaga was before Jay-Z, to not make them mad, to do performances that had pro-American messaging at a time when we really should be anti-American. And like, you can not call that propaganda, but I don't know why you wouldn't. And discourse got contentious around whether propaganda was the appropriate word. Hannah is not from the South. I don't know about her Southern experiences, but Southern Black Americans definitely took issue with the way the analysis came down because it didn't take into account how the South has a different sense of connection to all these American images and how Shout out to, I can't remember her name. She's right here. Shout out to her because like she had a lot of good takes in this whole like conversation. She made a point that like Black culture is Black Southern culture at its core. That's where all of us stem from. That's where some of the best things we've ever done got their creation in.
When you're Black, you have to look at America a little bit different. You have to look at America like the uncle who put you through college, but also molested you. I think that quote kind of gets to the core of this whole Beyonce as a propagandist discourse and why this is a really interesting conversation that we could be having, but we can't because A, propaganda has a negative connotation. Being an annoying leftist, of course, I understand that propaganda is not necessarily a negative thing always, but to the layman, propaganda is a negative thing. So one, understand the words that you use and the audience who is taking those words in and how they are commonly understood. Not understood under a leftist understanding of that, but a common understanding. So that's the first thing I want to get out of the way. The second thing, and I think most important thing, goes back to that quote that I said at the beginning of this video. American culture is Black culture. Black culture is American culture. These two are intertwined. They cannot be dissected. American culture would not exist without Black culture.
And all of that could have been happening, right? Like in a normal situation, even if you disagreed with the initial take that started things off, in a room full of like mature, healthy people, it's just a really stimulating intellectual conversation. Maybe a little bit of a debate. Maybe somebody raised their voice a little bit. But on TikTok, who on TikTok? So we're about to get into a topic I've alluded to multiple times, made a little video about it some years ago, but we're coming back. We're spinning the block because it's a long time coming. And before I start, I have to put up, again, this image of my wife and kids. I know to some of y'all, this is kind of cringe, but much like with Hannah, what happens in these discussions sometimes is that certain folks, when they can't actually argue against the point you make, will just try to invalidate you on the basis of your standpoint in the conversation. So just to head off the preferences accusations, I need y'all to see my preferences. All right? All right. That being said, Hannah being biracial or being biracial in general is not irrelevant to a conversation about Black issues, just like not being from a place that is being discussed is relevant. Recognizing where someone's standpoint is on an issue is an important aspect to interpreting their analysis. And in a normal intellectual conversation, as I just said, maybe we could dig into racial identity and Southern Blackness in a mature manner, but that's not what happened. Instead, shit got stupid. Not to say that they weren't intelligent responses to Hannah's take. I already talked about some of them, but the responses, because we're on TikTok, that got the most traction were about her racial identity. Both those attacking her and defending her. All that analysis on Beyonce and her performance and whether you agree or not about propaganda, that shit was about to go right out the window. We are now entering the biracial discourse zone. And because of that, we're gonna have to really get into some weird race science shit and just, it is what it is, y'all. Another creator, let's call a creator one, starts a response video to Hannah with the following statement.
If the first person you suckled on was your oppressor because your mother is white, you do not get to spearhead the conversation of Black Southern patriotism.
Now, out of context, this is a weird sentence, but in context, this is still a weird sentence, but it's also funny. It was funny. You laughed, I laughed, everybody laughed. Hannah's video has like 500,000 views. This video has like 2 million. Within Black community, light-skinned people have always been subjected to jokes like these, and these jokes are funny. And considering the dynamics of how light-skinned people are treated by the world compared to darker-skinned Black people, my light bright brothers and sisters, y'all gonna have to take some of those jokes to the dome or be ready to fight a nigga. Many a dark-skinned cousin has gotten slapped in the mouth for talking crazy to their light-skinned cousin, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with you having to swing on a motherfucker that doesn't respect your Blackness and is going a little too far with the jokes. But roasting, joning, capping, playing the dozens, etc. has always been a thing in Black communities. It will never stop being a thing. It can get toxic. We might need to reevaluate this tradition as a community, but I'm not going to lead that charge. Shout out to Color Mind, by the way, who made a great video exploring this topic. But keeping it real, the shit was funny. And in a normal all Black setting, what happens is everybody jumps up and runs around and laughs And maybe the person that it's said to is not a happy camper, depending on how close-knit that community is. Like, that's not a joke you should be saying to a random light-skinned person that you are having a debate with that you met one night. But it still is mostly jokes. It does not have to become a serious entry to the conversation or discourse. But in the world of social media, specifically on TikTok, a place where like I could have 500,000 subscribers and 3 degrees and a history of some of the most balanced, informed, and well-presented takes on politics or race or whatever. And like, I could have a video and a page doing all of that. And then like some random motherfucker could respond to my video that has never read a book in the last 20 years. But if they're funny and clever enough, we're basically equals. Not that what was happening here specifically, but that is how TikTok is designed. So somehow this obvious, very funny, very effective joke got elevated to a serious like entry into the conversation, and then all hell broke loose. But as I alluded to earlier, the fact that Hannah's video was even in a position to create this response is not an accident. And for that, I do have to get into the biracial discourse nonsense. Not colorism, mind you, and how colorism affects almost everything Black people do in this country, but whether or not biracial people are Black, which is a ridiculous conversation that keeps happening on the internet. And you're gonna have to convince me that this did not originate by a post made by someone in the CIA and put on Lipstick Alley. So let me just start with the basics. Race, as we often use it, isn't a real thing in the biological sciences. There's a human race, a species of grade 8. That's us. That's it. Whether your skin is black or white or some other shade, because I don't like, is yellow. Like, I was never cool with that. All right? Isn't that weird that we call people yellow? Them niggas not yellow. It's the same way that some cats have stripes and some cats have spots. And you might say, oh, that's orange cat behavior, but that's not based on actual biological science. That's a social observation that we've attached meaning to. And what that means, social construction, is that we basically made the shit up. We just agreed that this thing means this thing. And so this does mean that race has meaning. It does have real life consequences on the way people move through it in the world. But whenever someone says biracial isn't Black, they're not actually making a biological scientific observation. They're trying to create new meaning based on their opinion. But when they start arguing about it and people start taking it seriously, I know everybody involved with that failed biology and sociology. Like, first off, how would you exclude biracial people from Blackness? Like, exactly how would that work both historically and scientifically? Who gets to decide this? What rules will be used? And more importantly, what purpose does it serve? Which is, I'll get there in a second. Because first and foremost, phenotypes among Black people can go all over the place, and we've never had a problem with that. Monica the singer, right? Millennial core, I know. Some of y'all motherfuckers don't know who Monica is. She's a singer before Beyonce killed all the R&B singers. She has a biracial dad. And if biracial isn't Black, if only 2 Black people can have a Black child, then she only has 1 Black parent. What does that make her? She obviously doesn't look anything but Black. But since we making up new shit, I mean, y'all tell me. Russell Wilson, low-key looks biracial, but both his parents are Black. Or maybe they're not, because I think Russell's great-great-great-granddaddy was white. So is he not Black? When down the line do you become Black if you have a white ancestor? By the way, almost all of us have white ancestors. And Russell Wilson phenotypically doesn't look Blacker than Monica, but according to these goofy rules, he is, maybe. And like, Beyonce, does Beyonce represent Black women, or does she represent colored women like the girl from South Africa with the dance? I don't know. I don't be keeping up with shit, but I know she pissed y'all off when she said she wasn't Black. But I guess for some of y'all that was like, yeah, fuck that bitch, she white or something or whatever. It's goofy. This shit is goofy. My favorite goofy take is, well, if the mama Black, then the baby Black. Okay, right? Follow this logic. Meghan Markle's mother is Black. So by this logic, Meghan Markle is Black, right? Meghan Markle, who straight up says she didn't realize she was Black till she went to live with white people in England. And if Meghan Markle is Black, then her daughter is Black. So here we go. 2 strong Black women, according to y'all logic. Y'all are dumb. This is not about like caping for biracial people. This is about being annoyed when dumb shit gets elevated to intelligent discourse. Oh, Lipstick Alley got us. They got us. Black people have always had identity issues. There have always been sellouts and of a variety of complexions, and historically, there have been people of African descent who have sought to distance themselves from blackness through aesthetics, chemicals, or maybe even future children. You ever see a whole family of light skins? It's weird. Like Steph Curry whole family, your whole family Steph Curry, I know what you are. But all of this is rooted in anti-blackness and colorism, sociological concepts, not biological ones, meaning we agree on them, but that's because we have logical reasoning and historical backing to make sense of that decision. It's anti-blackness and colorism that hurt black people both in and out of community. Having a white parent is just incidental. Does it change the way those dynamics might play out? Definitely. But does it make your experience not a part of the black experience in real life since slavery? No. But to a couple of people online in the last half decade or so, maybe, but I'm not paying attention to y'all no more after this video. Beyonce in all her Creole glory has given us some of the blackest art of our modern times, if not ever, especially at this level. All while wearing blonde wigs and being lighter than a brown paper bag. And don't get me wrong, her lighter skin status is something to be critiqued within her art, and we shouldn't disregard that as a whole, especially as we talk about colorism. But at no point have we ever, or should we ever, not see Beyonce as a black artist or deny her the right to talk about black experience the way she has, at least not based specifically on her phenotype. The biggest logical flaw with all this biracial isn't black discourse and how it should only be monoracial black people to talk about black issues is it makes it seem like monoracial black people don't have horrible takes on blackness and race. Like we don't have Clarence Thomas, Candace Owens, academics, Kanye West running around saying some of the worst shit about black people in history with the most black phenotypes you could have. Or that historically there aren't people like Kathleen Cleaver and Thurgood Marshall and many others who have put on for black people despite having a biracial status. It's always been about community and who you move with, not who your mama is. Devolving all this analysis into who does or doesn't have two black parents just makes it easier for bad ideas and bad analysis to go unchecked. Now, I want to point out that there is a gender dynamic to this issue. There's a world of problems around colorism that black women experience, that black men really don't experience. But again, that's colorism. And all this biracialism black talk really isn't colorism. It's eugenics. It's weird that this has gotten a pass for as long as it has. If we were to create a sociological concept such as monoracial, as many of you are trying to make happen, is to suddenly say, okay, anyone lighter than Beyonce is technically not black, even if they have two black parents, that wouldn't get rid of colorism. It wouldn't. It would just be a new category. That's basically what's happening with Tyler or Twyla, whatever her name is, in South Africa. Like, please believe the colored people in South Africa enjoy a particular hierarchy among black people in South Africa. That's why they're so clear on not being distinguished as black in the first place. Two black parents does not eliminate racism in America. It doesn't destroy white supremacy. It just makes it easier to make up bad ideas. For example, when Creative One finishes her video, she says the following.
The only reason why a lot of people are allowing you to speak over monoracial black people is because of the color of your skin and the loose texture of your curls. Simple as that.
So monoracial, which I don't like that word. This sentiment is in some sense correct. I want to be clear on that. But it in most senses misses the point. The issue I take with it is that it seems to imply that there are other black people who are censoring this take because it's more legitimate in our eyes because it's coming from a light-skinned person. And that's just not the case. I won't say outright that some black people don't deify lighter skin in many different ways that they probably don't even acknowledge. That much is true. That's how anti-blackness, or in this case, internalized anti-blackness works. Black people are conditioned to give each other the least amount of grace and regard sometimes, but that is conditioning that we greatly do not abide by consciously, especially when it comes to issues in race and politics. In fact, I would argue that it's usually darker skinned black women that we take more seriously when it comes to race and politics. But all of that is not important. The real reason her video blew up was the reaction to it. The fact that people were reacting not to her take low key, that people were reacting more so to the joke and to the fact that somebody pointed out that she was light-skinned as a critique of her argument, which doesn't make any sense. And that's low-key not really from us, but coming from the aforementioned biases built into TikTok. And those biases did make a lot of folks respond and interact with the video, and that made it spread even more. But again, that's not about her take. That's not people taking what she's saying more seriously. That's people reacting to her biracial status. Let's say this was a perfectly cogent and accurate argument from Creator One, that the only reason that she was being censored was due to her light skin. Could we not also say the same thing about Beyonce herself? Was Beyonce that much better than all those other women I mentioned earlier, or was she lighter skinned and thus got more chances in the solo R&B meta like so many others did? If Doja were lighter skinned, would she not get a pass for her minor faux pas the way some of y'all give Doja Cat a pass for really weird shit? If Normani were lighter skinned, would she have the same opportunities as Chloe Bailey? Right? But I think we know the answer to a lot of these, right? We know that Doja Cat has hits. She's a weirdo. I don't like her as a person, right? But the girl has hits. Chloe Bailey had Beyonce behind her, had Parkwood Entertainment behind her, and that's why she's where she's at and not Normani. And maybe there's some light skin privilege involved in that. I don't know. Results are the results. And Beyonce is generally better and more talented than all the women that I've named up until this point in this video. It just is what it is, including the other light skinned women of her era. Christina Milian and Anne-Marie are the same complexion. We see who's here right now and who's on the Joe Budden podcast. No shade. At the end of the day, this take from Creator One was a deflection and distraction from the strength and accuracy and insight that Hannah was presenting in her analysis that not a lot of people had an argument for. The whole Southern pride thing, Hannah missed on that, but everything else, I'm sorry, the girl's cooking. Y'all need to hold that in. A really important conversation around Beyonce that was, again, really about the conflict between Black people of different political ideologies and how those ideologies might be super important to get on one accord right now to go address the oppressor was lost as soon as we all laughed at a joke about someone suckling on the oppressor's teeth. And you would think that would be the extent of this whole thing getting off topic and getting weird, but shit's about to get even weirder. All right, lightning round. Another creator, Creator Two, we'll call them, makes the observation that whenever you have these bad takes from biracial people, it's always biracial people with white mamas.
Why is it that every time we think a person might have a white mom, based off of their behavior, before we know for a fact that they do, it turns out that they do?
Now, this is true. Many of the most cringe moments that come from biracial people with white moms, but this is one of those causation correlation things, meaning like just because one thing happens and then another thing happens, it doesn't mean that thing one caused thing two. They just might have happened irrespective of each other. And in this case, the reality is that most biracial Black people are born from white women. And that's because Black men are twice as likely to marry a white woman than a Black woman is to marry a white man. And that's just talking about marriages in like just general relationships, baby mama situation. I'm not gonna play into stereotypes right now, but I'm just saying certain things be happening and certain Black children have to be raised by their white mama, low-key apart from Blackness. And that can produce some not so great takes on Blackness from those individuals as they try to figure out how all this Black shit works, which we're all doing to an extent. That shit gets real murky. Already made a hour some odd long video about it. Go watch that when you have time. But statistically speaking, if you meet a biracial Black person, their mother is probably not Black. That's just the numbers game. That's important because identity politics, the way some of y'all use them, gets bad because it leaves important context and analysis out of the equation. You just identify white and Black and say, yeah, we figured it out. But no, because that leaves a lot of niggas to do dirty shit and y'all don't even be noticing it. See other videos about that too. Anyway, somebody came around, we'll call them Creator 3, and made this general same point that biracial Black people tend to be born from white moms, so that doesn't really compute into anything really meaningful.
Say that you were crossing a bridge and then from under that bridge popped out a biracial and they were like, in order to cross this bridge, you have to answer my riddles. The first question is, which of my parents is white? And you guessed white mom. You would be right 75% of the time. This is based off of some really shitty statistics, but around 70% of marriages that happen between black and white people, 70% of them are black husband, white wife. So it's not even that like we have a sixth sense about who is black mom, white mom. It's that if you guess white mom, you're most of the time going to be right.
And because this is TikTok, this produced a contentious back and forth between Creator 3 and Creator 2. All right, so then Creator 2 proceeds to crash out on Creator 3. I believe they made like 50 different videos in what seemingly started like a back and forth, but eventually just turned into a fourth. Like there was no back, right? Creator 3 wisely checks out of the conversation, but then maybe unwisely decides that he wants to vent to what he thinks is a private audience about their experience. So he makes his private video.
Girl is dropping a new video about me every 10 minutes. Every 10 minutes. And someone, when I made the first video, someone was like, oh, you probably shouldn't interact with her. And I was like, wow, like I don't know who this is. My bad. What's wild about the whole thing is that I really didn't say anything about her. Like, you know.
And it's really as nice as it could be. It was the equivalent to, again, venting to people that you think have your back. Except one of those people definitely did not have his back. One of those folks on his mutuals list was very, very messy. Suddenly, here comes Creator 4, who saw this friends only private video and said, I should send this to Creator 2 because cowardice or something.
That was me. That was me that screen recorded that friends only video. No one's gonna do anything about it. No one's gonna beat me up. No one's gonna delete my accounts. No one's gonna do nothing to me. I screen recorded it to her because I thought that video was cowardly. You made a video about that black woman first. She responds to you, and because you can't get the last word and you can't shut her up, you want to sit here and be a whole weirdo, making video after video about her. And then one video you making friends only, bro? Like that is cowardly to me. That's weird. So yeah, I was being messy and I sent it to her.
And I'm gonna try to be nice. I don't know Creator 4 like that. I've never watched their content. I just know this was a really weird, messy thing to do. And the arguments for why this messy thing to do was justified didn't make any sense to me. And then in the same video, he's like, niggas ain't gonna do nothing. Niggas need to fight me if they feel like some type of way or whatever he was saying, which was wild, especially considering that Creator 3 brought up the fact that Creator 4, I guess, has allegations for child abuse with them.
No one was threatening to beat you up, you dramatic ass nigga.
Which is like wild business to get out here in a conversation that's supposedly about Beyonce. And in Creator 4's explanation about why they did this weird shit to Creator 3 and sent Creator 3 video back to Creator 2, whatever the situation is, was basically because he thought Creator 3 was being a coward. And so Creator 4 doing that, but not saying anything initially, I guess that wasn't cowardly or not messy or whatever. But one thing I'll point out is that within Creator 4's explanation for this weird behavior, they talked about Creator 3's relationship with, we'll call them Creator 5 and maybe Creator 6. And Creator 5 and Creator 6 are not black, but they were kind of up in black people's business. But Creator 5's reason for being up in black people's business was because a multitude of other creators, including Creator 2, were going back and forth about whether or not black people should support Kamala Harris, regardless of what was happening in Palestine. And Creator 5 is an advocate for what's happening in Palestine. And the way that conversation went wasn't good. It wasn't good on either side.
Hello. It's me, the angry black woman.
And I guess people got mad at Creator 3 because Creator 3 is friends with Creator 5, and Creator 4 brought this up during his beef with Creator 3 regarding the beef from Creator 2. And so much of that still boils down to black liberals versus black leftists, because black liberals wanted everybody to support Kamala Harris, even though she was supporting genocide. And black leftists were like, you really shouldn't support Kamala Harris because she's supporting genocide. And black liberals were like, look, I know she's supporting genocide, but the other person will also support genocide, which you might as well support the person who will not be as worse as the other person, because both of them are going to support genocide. And the people actually getting genocide are like, nigga, that's not good enough. And they did use the word nigga. They may not have actually used the word nigga, but it felt like they were using the word nigga. So the niggas was like, y'all motherfuckers are talking kind of wild to us right now. Y'all don't know us like that. And that's not our problem. Although really it is. And low key, we benefit from the problems being created in that situation. And then when Kamala Harris lost the election, black folks went to Starbucks and was like, you watermelon people die. And it's like, wow, is that how we're really going to act under the circumstances? I know y'all are mad, but they're still being genocided. And you might be asking yourself, the fuck does any of this have to do with Beyonce? How did we get here? And what's wild is I just explained it. You just listened to me explain how we got from Beyonce does a halftime performance in Houston on December 24th to whatever it is I just described. This is what I mean when I say Beyonce is everything. because only the preeminent artists of the time could inspire people to move the way folks were moving for this like 2-3 week period. And in realizing this, it also makes me think that we only have so much time left of this being Beyonce's time. And I don't know if we've taken full advantage of it. And to take full advantage of it, we probably need to alter our behavior a little bit. I interviewed Ismatu Gwendolyn, a TikToker, about this video. And I also read her essay, The Role of the Artist is to Load the Gun. And in that essay, she says a lot of excellent things. You should definitely go read it. But specifically, I want to talk about this excerpt right here.
I just updated my thoughts about Beyonce and went viral again for dissenting to the airs of working class solidarity she dons when it's time to circulate her wildly lucrative art. While she certainly is not the only example, it does pain me particularly that the reigning monarch of the music industry chooses liberation in her works and capitalistic oppression in her business decisions. As previously stated, money is a blank check for world making.
Furthermore, after finishing a chunk of the video, I sent it to Irby, and he gave me some notes which included the following passage.
You know, when you're referencing the self-titled album, there was a rise in a feminist movement, right? We see a rise in Me Too, Time's Up, Slut Walks. And Beyonce in 2013 is creating a pop feminist body of work where she is unequivocally aligning herself with the feminist label. But it's problematic because, to your point, you know, girl boss feminism, pop feminism is white and individualistic in nature. So it's like, this is not necessarily the kind of feminism that's going to really liberate anybody, but she is participating in this discourse. She is sparking this discourse because she is creating work that speaks to the contemporary conversation at that time, right? When you look at Lemonade and how we are transitioning into Trumpism and racial you know, we're outside of the Obama era. So the mirage that a lot of Americans, particularly white Americans, have of racial, you know, we're a post-racial society, excuse me. That mirage is now kind of going away because we're stepping into a more, you know, well, it's always been racist, but you know what I'm saying? Race discourse is picking up because of Trumpism, and Beyonce is creating Lemonade, which is a project that's supposed to center Black women and Black women's experiences. When you start thinking about also Renaissance, how queer folks have been under attack, how she wanted to create a project that was liberatory. And there was, over the same time Renaissance comes out, there's over 500 pieces of legislation being introduced that's anti-LGBTQ, right? So there's always this piece where she's creating something that is definitely, it rides this fine line of lifting up the voice of the social ills of that time. And I think that when you lay that foundation in the first half, it makes the transition into how TikTok has become a landscape for that discourse, but done in a much more, you know, watered down, it loses depth for the sake of breadth in terms of the scale of people talking about an issue.
So Irby is a Beyonce super fan, although if you watch his content, you'll know that he is very much critical of Beyonce. And Ismatu, she don't fuck with Beyonce pretty much at all, but understands the necessity of analyzing the unique problem that Beyonce presents. So you might think they will be very far apart in the way they might engage with this topic, but they end up coming to similar conclusions here. They both seem to indicate that on some level, Beyonce's art reflects the times. Irby feels like this reflection is imperfect in that her art ends up falling short or maybe even undermining the politics she seeks to engage in. That she is this amazing, iconic, extremely talented, legendary artist that captivates really all of the culture, but definitely a portion of the culture that tends to drive what Black culture is. But in doing that, she also does dirt on the low, maybe on accident, likely on purpose. And so there's a disappointment attached to his fandom for that great artist. Not saying that I think Irby expects or requires Beyonce to be this perfect figure, but maybe that it would be nice to have an artist of Beyonce's caliber also be the ultimate truth teller for the moment. It'd be nice if Beyonce loaded the gun for us. It'd be nice if Beyonce was more like Nina Simone. Nina Simone is one of the greatest and influential Black musicians of all time. In the 1960s, when Motown was exploding and images of black art were on the rise, James Brown, the Jackson 5, the Temptations, and so many others, they were everywhere. And in the mix was also Nina Simone, doing something a little different, but also something a little classic, and also something much more radical and dangerous to the status quo. The 60s and 70s were an incredibly volatile, tumultuous, and complex time for black people. Just over the course of her time in the spotlight, Nina witnessed the assassinations of Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, John F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King. But somehow at the same time, this era was an explosion for black art, black commerce, black athletic achievement, and of course, black power. And importantly, there was a lot of pressure on black people with high visibility to use some of that visibility to agitate against a system of white supremacy that was still legally getting away with lynchings, let alone the daily injustices that black people face. Throughout black history, there's nothing new about black artists and athletes and business people dabbling in political expression. Langston Hughes wrote prolifically about the challenges black people face. Same with Richard Wright. But black figures who gain significant notoriety and acceptance into white society, which means access to their resources, if they dared to advocate for black liberation, they were consistently met with resistance in the form of blackballing, legal troubles, or outright threats on their lives. So many a historical black figure saw their stars stamped out before their time. People that dared to speak up like Paul Robeson, Muhammad Ali, Lena Horne, Harry Belafonte, and Nina Simone. Nina could have been as big as Beyonce during her time. She could have been closer to Diana Ross or Tina Turner. But instead, she used her star power to advocate for black people in an unflinchingly radical way. Again, a lot of people were always agitating and doing things, and there were little wins like people refusing to play segregated audiences or getting more rights for their art in the music industry. But few were ready to push the envelope like Nina, because right at the moment where she was about to cross over into the highest possible status of her career, she risked it all. Carnegie Hall is probably the closest thing to a Super Bowl performance that existed in the 1960s, and it was Nina's dream to play it one day. And when she got the opportunity, unlike Beyonce's flawed half measure of a performance or Kendrick's flawed half measure of performance, she made sure there were no questions about what she was trying to get across in front of that predominantly white audience in the middle of the civil rights movement, again in 1964.
That's just the trouble. Desegregation, mass participation, unification, do things gradually, will bring more tragedy. Why don't you see it? Why don't you feel it? I don't know.
She played the song Mississippi Goddamn for the first time publicly, and Mississippi Goddamn is a scathing, direct rebuke of racist violence against black people. It was a middle finger to white supremacy at a point where white supremacy could still come see her in the middle of the night and low-key not have any legal recourse. This was not a song of deep symbolism or vague messaging. It was not left up to interpretation. It did not require a deep analysis to understand its meaning. It was direct and in your face, and it cost her immediately. The song was literally outlawed in many states in the South. It cost her a lot of her public persona and appearances. Her rising star quickly dimmed, and the end result basically is that Nina Simone, despite being a legend, is greatly a legend like to black people and does not have nearly the cultural cachet that a person of her talent and like star power deserved from that time period. I only knew of Nina Simone from people like Mos Def and Talib Kweli, Brother Ali, and yes, even Kanye West. It was through them that I heard her music, not through any other bastion of black culture industry. To make it plain, James Brown has had multiple movies and books and documentaries made about his life and his music. And his biopic starred Chadwick Boseman, one of the greatest black actors of the last decade. And yeah, James Brown made Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, like 5 years after Nina Simone made Mississippi Goddamn. And if you go back and listen to that song, James Brown never says he's black and proud. Only the kids do that shit. James Brown didn't have nothing to do with that. Did y'all know James Brown supported Richard Nixon for president? What? He was basically the first Kanye. Meanwhile, Nina Simone, do I even want to bring up Nina Simone's biopic? Do I? Nina inspired a generation and kept certain legacies alive with her sacrifice. That's what real revolutionary art looks like. And for all her talent and maybe good intentions, Beyonce is no Nina Simone. But here's where it gets interesting, at least to me, or here's where I think there's something to learn. Because Ismatu, even being a non-Beyonce fan, says the same thing about Beyonce as Herbie, except she interprets it differently. Ismatu thinks that the fact that Beyonce's art is so co-opted, so compromised, so counter-revolutionary is actually the real reflection of the times.
Everybody want to be Nina Simone, with their Pan-African flags hanging listlessly in their music videos and their fight songs about freedom being used for the next president of the United States of America. Absolutely no one wants to sing Mississippi Goddamn. And that's just it, isn't it? We've arrived at the reason I wrote an essay madly, maniacally, in one sitting with a busted finger to boot. I have seen critique after critique that our contemporary Black artists do a poor job of reflecting the time. I think that we're liars. These artists are reflecting the times. We just don't care for our reflection.
The times are in moments awe-inspiringly beautiful, intimidating in its capacity to execute high art and messaging, even when detached from good intent. The times are brutal and uncaring toward the least of us and is willing to exploit us for the sake of profit. The time shows us a vision of the world we desire, but also expects us to pay a premium for limited access to that world. The times don't really be making sense when you think too hard about it, but it's the times we live in, so you have no choice but to love and appreciate it. And all of this paradox means that at times, the art of the time might make all of us crash out in ways that seemingly are not related, not until we dig into where that crash out stems from. Does the crash out stem from Beyonce's music being so excellent and inspiring and perfectly crafted, or that it speaks to struggles that no one else on her level really touches? Is the crash out cause from watching that same music from Beyonce and its intended meaning then be licensed to support a political party whose history directly conflicts with the meanings of the songs that they're playing at their rallies? Is the crash out calls from watching that same political party who, despite its flaws, we support, still fail miserably from shielding us from fascism? Is the crash out because our icon reminds us of our troubled, confusing issues around colorism and featureism and desirability? Is it from seeing an icon play in our faces with concert tickets? That shit was wild. I ain't have time to get into that, but like, I'm gonna need like 5 more video essays from y'all about how it felt when that ticket shit happened. But anyway, with all of this happening and then some, how could we not crash out? But at the same time, how could we expect Nina Simone out of Beyonce considering the times at hand? One thing I'll put out there that I haven't really heard enough on the left is that artists like Nina Simone and Harry Belafonte and Paul Robeson had the benefit of making art directly in the middle of organized and explicit Black struggle. This is not to say that Beyonce doesn't deserve criticism for her hypercapitalism and counterinsurgent behavior, but Beyonce and her art don't exist in a vacuum. She reflects the time. She reflects 75 years of propaganda targeted at Black people to get them to buy into a system and see it as their vessel for liberation. She reflects 75 years of propaganda targeted at Black people to get them to buy into the system and see it as their only vessel for liberation. Beyonce exists in a time where everyone knows about Du Bois's Talented 10th. Raise your hand in the chat if you heard the Talented 10th speech in some form or fashion growing up, right? And then raise your other hand if you heard that Du Bois completely rejected that idea later on in his life when he realized that the Talented 10th shit would only lead to bougie Negroes fucking over other Black people to get more access to money. I guarantee you a lot of us didn't. Nina lived in the time of Martin Luther King. Beyonce lives in the time of Sean King. If the artist's role is to load the gun, Nina was able to do that because the people put a gun in her hands. And right now, we don't have that for Beyonce. We have not done that for her. Beyonce's only weapon is TikTok. And that may seem like shade, or maybe it's a sad state of affairs, but it's not as bad as you think. At least not if we all get our acts together. These platforms that we use to make this type of content are imperfect, and they are designed to create rage cycles and chaos amongst us, right? And yes, these apps and social media networks are designed to support the very systems that we seek to destroy. But so is a gun. And much like a gun, if used responsibly, something like this, something like not just what I'm doing, but what all of these commentators and yappers and historians and researchers and educators here on YouTube, TikTok, and even on Twitter, and even in podcast land, all of that can be a very useful tool for struggle and Black liberation. I genuinely believe that art is divine. People that can make good music, good paintings, good writing, good stories, etc. Those are people, shout out to sinners, that are literally touched by something divine within the human condition. And those are people that need to be protected and upheld as much as possible, even when their art is kind of fucked up, or even when their great art conflicts with their not so great real life activity. When the art conflicts with reality, it's our role as the educators, the philosophers, the commentators, the yappers to make sense of that. Because we're talented too. I won't go as far as to say that everyone is an artist or that everyone is divinely touched, but you can't do what some of these yappers do in a minute or less and not feel like there's something special in that ability. But the problem is we need to hone that ability to focus on real useful change for Black people. Like, there's gonna be people watching this video, right, that are like, this video wasn't enough about Beyonce. I needed more Beyonce analysis from FD Signifier. And I apologize to those who might be disappointed, but I also want to point out, like, y'all, Herbie Revelis exists, T Noir exists, Khadijah and Bo exists. I know you may desire my perspective on a specific topic, but there's always going to be things that I'm going to have a limited perspective on that other people are better at. Anything that I would say about Beyonce, I'd probably just be stealing from them. But consider the fact that by making a video about Beyonce, I was able to bring up all these other issues. That's what her unique role is as the artist of our time. And even if she falls short of what that role should entail, she still offers the opportunity for good things to come out of that. Our artists and celebrities give us the biggest canvas and the loudest speakerphone to make significant things happen. So we should be criticizing, arguing about, and discussing Beyonce and Kendrick and Coogler and Jordan Peele and Butler and Baldwin and whomever else. To me, that's honoring the divinity within their gift and their talent and their art, but also honoring our own and the role we need to be playing, especially right now. And to do that, we do have to be more aware of oppression and co-option that exists on these platforms so that we don't turn molehills into mountains and we don't give wind to bad ideas because they make us feel good. We need to be revolutionaries, not reactionaries. I don't know what this looks like. I don't know what a union of Black political commentators throughout social media might look like, and I doubt we'd all be able to get along very easily. But I think we all want the same thing. I think we all know who our enemies are. And I think we all have a role to play in this, but we have to play that role effectively. And that role does not mean turning Beyonce into a revolutionary. It maybe means looking at the compromised revolutionary aspects of her art and making sure that the people understand what they're looking at the highest level possible. But that's all I got today, y'all. You can tell my voice is almost gone. And this was one of the hardest videos for me to make for a variety of reasons. And it's only possible, number one, because of my Patreon patrons who help keep this machine afloat. My patrons are the only people whose money and income I can plan against and pay people like Babilla to put together this homunculus of a video. But on top of that, I'm also supported by my streaming service, Nebula. And I also have something cool to show everyone that I just put on Nebula a couple of months ago that you're gonna look at right now. So this is low-key the hardest video I've ever made.
Oh, I got a disease, Babilla. I got a disease.
Babilla, what's wrong with me? Like trying to thread all these different lines together, the whole everything part was not easy. It was very difficult. And I'm very scared that this is going to be a flop that I invested a lot of time and money in. So if you're seeing this last message right now, thank you, because you've helped make that not the case. Crossing my fingers as a lot of you. However, there are a few more things you can do to continue to help the channel. Number one, as you know, about how I got certain things wrong. I understand, I appreciate and look forward to the feedback. But specifically right now, I want to tell you all about my streaming service, Nebula. Earlier in the video, I briefly mentioned a man named Takao Ozawa, a Japanese man back in 1914 who sued the American government to get officially recognized as being white. It is a wild story that I briefly touched on in my short documentary, Talking to White People. If this is the first time seeing me, you might not know that I have a background in sociology, and I talk a lot about race, but I always try to talk about it in a way that is often not happening elsewhere on the internet. There's certain things I think we all know at this point, and there's certain things I think have been under investigated. And specifically, I feel like nobody's ever asked white people what the fuck white is. Like, we know what black is. We know what everybody else is doing, but they keep their shit to themselves. And I feel like that's kind of a problem. It feels like white people did to just sit back and look at everyone else dealing with the situation as if they're not a part of it, which is why I made this short documentary and why I hope to turn that short documentary into something bigger, but I can only do that if you sign up for my streaming service, Nebula. For those who may not know, Nebula is an independent streaming platform that has had my back on YouTube for years now. They've been instrumental in me continuing to grow my channel and the success I've had here on YouTube, not just because they give me a place to put my videos when those videos can't really live on YouTube, but also because Nebula is a place where some of the most talented, forward-thinking, and knowledgeable creators on YouTube are all collected together to try to make bigger, better, and more special things. Nebula isn't an alternative to YouTube. It's really developed into being an independent movie studio where we're trying to make more original content with bigger and better budgets that you can't see anywhere. A lot of us are working on developing full-fledged documentary series such as Tom Nicholas's documentary Boomers, which looks at the world's aging population and how that's a big effect on the problems we're facing, not just here in America, but across the world. We also have stuff like the travel reality show The Getaway, which features foreign man in a foreign land, and a bunch of other people traveling across the United States trying to figure out which one of them is a mole. Spoiler alert, all of them are moles, and it's pretty funny how that works out. Talking to White People is there and only there, but I also have videos about the Boondocks and Tupac that are only there on Nebula. And there's so much more and so much, hopefully, more to come. My ultimate goal is to turn Talking to White People into something bigger and more in-depth. I had a lot of fun with the short version of it, but there's more to engage with here, but I can only do that with your support because Nebula is not owned by Google or any other big tech company. We're not worried about our owner suddenly having a meeting with Donald Trump and changing the whole framework of the site. Everything we make at Nebula is produced in-house and funded directly through support from viewers. This is why you're seeing this ad read, because we need you to help us continue to make our vision come to life. So please support us in this evolution. Click on the link in the description or click the QR code on the screen and sign up to Nebula for a full year for 40% off. You'll be supporting the growth, not just of my channel, making it possible for me to take chances on videos like this, but also creators like me to continue to go beyond the limitations of YouTube and modern media as a whole. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you all liked it. Thank you so much to Nebula for sponsoring the video. I'm FD Signifier. Peace.